broadcasting, and here we go. All right, good evening, everyone. Whether you're here with us on the screen or tuning in via the town's YouTube channel, we welcome you to the Town of Hillsborough Board of Commissioners February workshop meeting, and we are glad you're with us. I will go ahead and open the work session with the roll call.
Commissioner Bell,
Present.
Commissioner English,
Present.
Commissioner Ferguson,
Here.
Commissioner Hughes,
Present.
Commissioner Lloyd,
Present.
Mayor Weaver,
I am also here. Thank you, Sarah. It's good to see everybody. Moving on to item number 2, agenda changes and approval. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Move to approve is presented.
Second.
Moved by Kathleen, seconded by Evelyn. We can roll call the agenda approval.
Commissioner Bell,
Aye.
Commissioner English,
Aye.
Commissioner Ferguson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Lloyd,
And the agenda is approved unanimously. Moving on to item number 3. Sorry, I was really lost track there for a second. Moving on to item number 3 is our consent agenda. We have 2 items on our consent. What's the pleasure of this board?
Move to approve is presented.
Second.
Moved by Kathleen, seconded by Evelyn. You can roll call the consent agenda.
Commissioner Bell,
Aye.
Commissioner English,
Aye.
Commissioner Ferguson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Lloyd,
And the consent agenda is approved. Moving on to item number 4, we have several in-depth discussions and topics. And the first one of those is a discussion with regarding the recommendations from the Mayor's Task Force on Reimagining Public Safety. In our packet, we have those recommendations plus Chief Hampton's response to each recommendation. All of that is in the packet. And I'm guessing, can we go ahead and let Chief in? And then we'll proceed. And while Chief Hampton is coming into the room, just as far as an order of operations this evening, as I'm going to offer a few remarks to open things up and set the tone a little bit for our discussion. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne. He's going to offer a few remarks as well. And then I'll facilitate our discussion as we go through item by item so that Chief Hampton can focus on the discussion and not trying to, field all the questions. So that is how we're going to move forward. And I did want to make a few opening remarks. And first, I want to thank the task force members for dedicating their time and attention to multiple meetings, more than they initially agreed to when they volunteered, all of this over Zoom on such a heavy and fraught topic. Your service is deeply appreciated, and I know some of them are watching this evening. Next, I also want to thank Chief Hampton for his engagement in this process. He engaged with the task force in the manner we on the board have grown accustomed to. No nonsense, but good humor, deep attention to detail, and willing to answer any and all questions to the best of his ability, including follow-up when needed. And then when the task force reached out to me asking if they could have a couple of meetings without Dwayne directly in the Zoom, he honored that request without hesitation, saying that he wanted to do whatever allowed the task force to feel they could do their work most effectively. So thank you so much, Chief Hampton. And also thank you to Eli Valsing. She's moved departments now, but provided great support to the task force, including pulling together research and reports. And before we get into this discussion, a few words about how we got here and how we will proceed this evening. In the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, our nation, our state, and our local community spoke loudly and in great numbers, alternately begging and demanding that we, and we meaning elected officials responsible to and for our communities, reimagine public safety in a way that ensures people are truly safe, including being safe from abuse by those in power or differentiated treatment based on race, whether that's intentional or not. Our board swiftly passed a resolution in response, and this resolution included several actionable items. One of those was instituting an advisory board to address these public safety issues. It was then decided that rather being strictly top down with the town manager and Chief Hampton, deciding what that advisory board might be, that we would establish this interim task force to discuss some of the issues that are most frequently brought up in the public discourse and to put some thought into what they'd like to see in a Hillsborough advisory board. The full description of the task force's work is in the packet, including their recommendations, along with Chief Hampton's responses. I see two really important principles for us all to keep in mind this evening. And the first one is to keep our shared interests at the forefront, rather than our individual positions. I imagine that we all, including board members, task force members, the police department, town staff, and the broader community, have varying positions on each of these items on the recommendation list. And some of those we might feel pretty strongly about or pretty dug in about. But I also have no doubt that we have a shared interest in a Hillsborough where everyone feels safe and like they will be treated fairly, whether they live or work here daily or just passing through. I know the board wants that, and I know the HPD wants that. The second principle is the tried and true Hillsborough saying of slower is faster. We need to be deliberate about how we approach this. We need to take our time and use as many meetings as it takes to do the job well. And to that end, we may not get through all of these recommendations tonight, and that's okay. So if I'm getting the sense that we're spinning our wheels a little bit, then we'll just pause and put what we haven't done to a future meeting. And then just a couple final comments. The task force was asked to make big asks, to imagine what they would like to see without constraint, knowing that there could be legal or capacity limitations that would provide challenges or maybe even prohibit some of those asks. And some of those we see in the packet this evening. But I think it's important for us as the policymaking body to hear new ideas and learn what our community is yearning for so that we can think creatively and be responsive. And as we go through the items, I'll be making note of what seem to be the most important 3 to 5 priorities based on either how the discussion goes or by you all saying so explicitly. So please don't be shy about what feels the most important. And part of our discussion this evening will be how to proceed from here. And then finally, I said this to task force members via email, but I also want the public to know who may be tuning in that we're not taking public comment on these recommendations tonight because this is a workshop meeting and we just don't have public comment at our workshops. But there will be opportunities in the future for public comment. And certainly people can email the board at any time, either individually or together. So with that, thank you for bearing with me, and I will turn it over to Chief Hampton.
All right. Well, I'll be very brief. I like the mayor echo, thanks to the task force for the work that they did put in. These are really complicated issues. This is, I think, kind of really the starting point of, I think, good discussion on a lot of these things. Our interest and our perspective is really about finding what's the right fit for Hillsborough. One of the things we've talked about is what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to solve? If this is in response to a problem that we have, what is it? And I think we're still struggling to define some of those answers throughout the task force work. I want to start by saying as well that you have a very good police department. Compared to what I see across the country, even in some of our peers, we have very strong structure, very strong systems. We're not going to be perfect. No organization is going to be, but I think the hearts and minds of our officers are in the right places. They're here to serve. They're here to do a good job. And all the actions that they take are generally done with that focus in mind, that, how can we make things better? How can we impact lives in a positive way? Law enforcement in its nature is not a terribly positive experience. The interactions we have are not the fun, good, happy interactions. Very few people are happy to see law enforcement come. So it's a lot of responsibility to balance, and it's a lot of responsibility being balanced by some very young men and women. So they work very hard to stay up to date. I think our agency has pushed to do a lot of innovative things. I think we've led the way in a lot of areas. So I'm very, very proud of what our folks have accomplished. Again, as we move through these, one of the big things that I hope to take away from this is kind of where are the areas we really need to spend time focusing, having additional discussion, maybe points that we can consider for follow-up. I don't know, if it'll help us in some of this discussion as we go to kind of say, all right, that's a big priority item that's going to need more discussion, and we kind of bookmark that for the follow-up. I'll be honest, been racking my brain over the weekend and last week trying to figure out how do we even have this conversation, because this is it. There's so much here. We've used the euphemism drinking out of a fire hose. That's what the task force had to do, because there's so many directions. There's so many aspects of this stuff that we didn't even touch on. So we're looking forward to the discussion, kind of figuring out where we need to go, what parts are going to need more discussion, what's going to be our next steps. So just keep that frame in mind. Is a lot of us is trying to look at what's right for Hillsborough, because not everything that people are doing everywhere is going to fit well here. And then again, why are we doing it? Are we doing it to solve a problem? What's the problem? How is it going to impact things in the long term? So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. And now if folks have the recommendations with them, the first piece in there is the whole section about the advisory board. And I'm actually going to go through the other items first, because I think the advisory board is its own animal, and some of our earlier discussions might help inform that a little bit. And I think there's a good chance that we might want to engage with task force members, maybe about multiple items on this list, but the advisory board is one where we may in particular decide we want to do that. So that's my rationale for doing the other things first. Are people okay with that? All right, cool. Well, then we will just start with the first section, which has to do with mental health crisis response. And the first item on here is to collaborate with other local jurisdictions, which are listed here, to pool funding resources to develop a coordinated countywide mobile mental health crisis response service. Now, I am not inclined to read all of these out loud, since we all have them in the packet, but someone yell at me if you decide you would like me to read these out loud. And I think we can I'll just keep folks in order, call on people for making comments or asking questions of Chief Hampton or the town manager as needed. And I just also want to say that Kevin Hornick is with us too, to address any of the legal questions that have been mentioned or might come up. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for being with us.
I mean, I'm going to jump in on a couple of things just because, well, to get things started, if you will.
Great.
The UNC Center of Excellence for Mental Health does have mobile units. What they do is pretty phenomenal, and it's expensive as all heck. And so, this is one of those things that, I am really happy that our officers in CIT training, and we really took the lead on that, and I'm really pleased with that. But I'm thinking of some of this and going, well, as a small agency, and I know that Chief had noted on cost and things, but I don't see it doable. on our level. And as far as the county level, I mean, I think it actually makes sense, but leveraging what already exists through UNC and that mobile in the mobile units through the UNC, the Center of Mental Health Excellence. And then there's also, what does that look like, and who does that the training, because there's a couple of components of, there's the response, and then what. And I'm reminded, having just attended the annual legislative breakfast on mental health, and the fact is we have a smattering of crisis response, but the state lacks the long-term supports, which a lot of the folks that law enforcement see are those, it's because we don't have permanent or long-term supports, where people go in the hospital, their insurance only covers X number of days, they're kicked out. Well, mental illness doesn't stop there. And so I grapple with this tags on this, a serious mental health need that we have in our community. But I don't see, it's one of those, having our police department tackled it, and certainly us on our own, I don't think we can do, but it's something that I do think that, where the county and UNC leveraging, coming together, and where we may participate, but it's not, I don't see that this is where we should be taking the lead. I think that would be the tail wagging the dog, because we're a smaller entity. And this is part of a much, much bigger issue. So those were kind of the initial thoughts as I was reading through. And then, like I said, as I was hearing, once again, year after year, the challenges we have at the state level, the county level, and it's serious. It's and I really appreciate the task force trying to tackle that. But I question, and it's like, is this the right venue? Is this the right place? I don't know. And so I just leave it, I don't know.
Thank you, Kathleen. Mark.
Appreciate Kathleen's comments. And so this is one area where I have a fair amount of experience working for about 10 years in the behavioral health field. I helped design the statewide telepsychiatry network that allows patients who've been involuntarily committed get rapid access to evaluation by a psychiatrist. And when I look at the first three recommendations that fall under the mental health crisis response, I have questions about what is an appropriate level of mental health services regarding law enforcement for a town of our size. The third recommendation to fund a minimum of 1 to 2 social workers to the town of Hillsborough is, given the fact that we only have 1 or 2 calls per week, would be an outsized solution to a problem. But I think when you take the first 3 recommendations together, my idea would be to fund one mental health professional that works not only mainly with maybe the police department, but with other areas of the town government to help. That person could perform those CIT trainings. They could respond to some kinds of calls. And I think they would lend a high level of subject matter expertise to the town of Hillsborough that we don't have right now. So we're responding to calls, but we don't really have the subject matter expertise in-house for that. So I see a potential position, one FTE that could really boost the town's ability to respond to, plan with, and coordinate with the multitude of resources and other professionals and best practices, especially the new Medicaid managed care organizations that they're taking on the standard first and second level behavioral health work. They're taking that away from the LME MCOs, who are going to focus on high degrees of mental health and traumatic brain injury and other kinds of services. So I think that if we had that subject matter expertise on staff in Hillsborough, that would enable us to engage more efficiently and be better educated and help us find the resources that we need to provide more meaningful care. And so that's all I have on the first one.
Thank you, Mark. And I see Chief Hampton has his hand raised, but I did want to ask, Mark, you threw out an acronym that I am not familiar with. Could you, I think there was an L, a C, and a O.
LME, MCO, Local Management Entity Managed Care Organization. Those are the state agencies that are right now are still providing mental health services.
That's
Thank
like the old Cardinal Innovations. Now, you know, the Behavioral Alliance or Alliance, I always get their name mixed up.
Alliance Health is our new LME MCO
Yeah.
for Orange County.
Thank you all. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Dwayne.
Just wanted to clarify a couple things. One, I was going to mention, we do have a new LME that's starting out now. Cardinal's being replaced. So there is access to resources that we can contact for some information, subject matter stuff like that. I did want to clarify the CIT training is not something, even if we hired a social worker, I think we would be able to deliver in-house. It is a very big week-long class that usually is done with a staff of about 6 to 8 people to present it. There's scenarios, there's lots of different providers coming in. So it is usually done by one part. Now, if we had someone, they could obviously be a part of and help with the classes. But I don't think one person would be able to pull off offering additional classes. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Rob.
All right. So the first one, collaborate with local jurisdictions to pool funding sources, develop coordinated countywide mobile mental health crisis or response service. I think it's something I'm very interested in seeing if we could, be a part of. The same issues that I think we deal with in terms of mental health are very similar in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and in other parts of Orange County. I know some of you, if not all of you, have heard of Cahoots in Eugene, Oregon, where I'm from, and they've done a really good job of addressing mental health with non-police kind of involved. And I think that's a model. If we can figure that out countywide and utilize the resources of UNC hospitals and anyone else that's providing basically mental health care in our area, I think it would certainly benefit, I think, all the residents of Orange County. So that's something I would definitely be interested in looking how we can partner and collaborate with our other municipalities and jurisdictions to see if there's a way that we can figure out how we can do that locally. Certainly support, increased training for
Right. Rob, I think you have frozen. All right. Rob is frozen. We will come back to him when he is able to come back. So we'll just put a pause on his comments. Oh, there you are. He's back. All right. I stalled just the right amount. You froze up a little bit there, Rob. So you were talking about just you supported more training That's when.
Yeah, and my question is, Chief Hampton, is when you do CIT training, is that just for Hillsborough HPD, or is it multi-jurisdictional where there's other people from other places? And how can we figure out a way to have, that be more accessible and offer more times a year, or is there?
It's a multi-agency. So usually every agency sends a few people. So you've got some Chapel Hill officers, you've got Hillsborough officers. We've even had EMS being involved in it as well. So it's multi-agencies are involved. The short answer is just it's a great class, but it's a great class because it's extremely labor intensive. They have to set up with partner organizations. They have lots of people in and out. They do role plays. It's a number of different instructors that are involved in helping make it happen. So again, it's not something I think we can go, oh, we'll just make more of that happen, because it's out of our control. And I think they're doing as much as they can. And obviously, as we move out of COVID, things will hopefully start opening back up. We have been reaching out and looking at getting these classes in other jurisdictions, which is good. It's not quite as good as doing it in your jurisdiction because they involve our resources and our people. So, we can send somebody to Alamance, but, they may get slightly different information or things like that. But I don't know that there's anything we could necessarily do to make more of those classes happen. We try to get several people in each one that's offered. It's just, and we've tweaked a lot of schedules and kind of made some folks work a lot extra to allow some extra people to be off to go to these when they do happen. So a really long-winded answer to, I think I gave.
No, that's good. And I know, so I also participated in the mental health first aid class and looking actually into becoming an instructor with that too. And it sounds like you felt that was a worthwhile training or class for officers at HPD, or is it stuff that they already knew, or?
To be honest, a lot of it does fall into that. We know this, we've heard this, we've been taught this before. Again, the thing is, mental health training is built into a lot of what our folks do. So even in basic law enforcement training, you might be dealing with a report writing block, and they may have a scenario that involves somebody who's in crisis, and it's built into a lot of stuff, but it was packaged in a good way. It was a lot of focus on self-help, which is good, recognizing among your peers the same thing. So it was a good bridge. It was a little tough in how it was presented, and they weren't quite ready to teach it the way they taught it. And I think that hurt a little bit of the value, but it was a good bridge training. No great epiphanies in a lot of it. And I think that's true of a lot of this training. It reinforces what officers have been taught time and time again throughout their career. And that's where the value is in the reinforcement.
Right. Good. Thank you for that. And then on the third point, in terms of allocate funding to add social workers, I just don't think, and I'd be curious, Mark, what you were thinking in terms of if we added, one person that specifically was there for that purpose and for all town employees, but one person, especially, for police work, that's 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. How much can they really be accessible to, for true kind of mental health crisis issues is my concern. And then lastly, Chief Hampton, I think you talked about as a alternative, and this obviously has some fiscal costs too, but can you share with us what the non-armed response model looks like? And is that 2 or 3 non-sworn officers that make up this team, or what is that actually?
The short answer is we don't know what it is yet.
Okay.
This is something that's been a topic of discussion. The idea of having co-responders, folks to respond to stuff. Again, when we talk about the mental health side, there's just not enough volume. people who are truly in crisis, we don't have that many. We have, again, that'd be one thing for somebody to do a week. And a lot of the ones that we deal with, and honestly, the vast majority, the officers handle perfectly. They resolve it, they get the person help, they connect them with resources. So again, it's a very limited amount of stuff for them to do. So if we're talking about adding a position to try to find alternative responses to law enforcement, I think we'd be benefiting looking for something broader, whether it's people who respond to, again, traffic accidents, they may respond to, again, non-emergency calls for service, things like that. I know there's some different places that have been kind of piloting this idea. Again, for it to be effective, you're really talking about a bunch of people. You can't just add, like to the point you just said, you can't just add one person, because yes, it's 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, except when they're on vacation, except when they take time off, except when they're sick. So, having folks hear enough to make it actually have an impact and see how this changes things. It would have to be an ad, because we don't know what it would take away yet. So the thing is, if we're really adamant, we want to have some sort of alternative response model, I would encourage we look at something broader. And I don't know what that looks like yet. I was not going to spend tons and tons of time figuring that out until you guys said, hey, we want this.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, sir.
That's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Kathleen.
I was actually going to touch on point of bringing someone on board, because mental health doesn't wait for, the work day during the workday 8 days or the 8 hours Monday through Friday. So I was thinking in terms of, along with Rob was saying, is that you need essentially 3 people to cover, because you don't know when. I also have done the mental health first aid. I actually tried to get into CIT, found out you're not allowed to if you're not EMS or first responders. And that was because my stepchildren are dual diagnoses, both of them, and dealing with crises and firsthand, and throwing a traumatic brain injury on top of that with one of them. And being, that's a whole different ball game. It's, what I was able to observe one day of one, and it was phenomenal. But I don't see us having the wherewithal, for the reasons Chief said, of being able to do it ourselves. I do like the idea of somehow partnering, or if we can, because UNC Center of Mental Health has got so much going on. Piedmont Health has got a lot going. And while Cardinal Innovations was less than stellar, Alliance is really pretty good. They're not as good as VIA, but they've got a lot going on. And I'm thinking that there's got to be a way to leverage that, those resources together in some manner.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I just kind of echo some of what we've mentioned about the mobile health response service. I think that does need to be a countywide type of thing. I don't think that with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions there, that there's enough resources to pull to have that, just simply on a standalone basis. So I'm glad that they do recommend a countywide mobile mental health response service. Good to see that the department is already looking at increased training with CIT. The one that I really, I think a lot of us have kind of struggled with or have already discussed, is the minimum of 1 to 2 social workers. There's a few things that come to mind there. Number one, I think the chief already said this, 1 to 2 is grossly really low. We know that our officers work 12-hour shifts. and that they rotate throughout the month as well. And so, even if we had that call volume, which Commissioner Bell has indicated we don't, that's not enough people. And I would really scratch my head and struggle to figure out where we would find the funding, because we've definitely have thought about adding additional positions to our town and various other departments, and even raising our property tax a little bit to cover a position. It doesn't, if I remember correctly, Eric, even small little increases don't pay for a full position when we add them to the payroll. And of course, there's other costs as well. The other thing that I kind of struggle with, I get the idea of housing folks in this situation not under the police department. I struggle with that because number one, they're looked at in the recommendation as a co-responder. And if that's the case, then pairing them with someone who's already in first response makes a lot of sense, even if that is within the police department. I know Chapel Hill has had a similar unit of social workers in the police department. Representative Greg Meyer used to work in such a unit way back when. But then also, I would just think of who else in our staff would, manage essentially a whole new department, and may not have the training to actually supervise them as well. So, I think if we had the volume for social workers, I don't think we do. I think the recommendation is really would be even then too low, I think, just because of burnout and other things as well. So I think maybe as the town grows, this is something we can go back to and see if it's needed. But I don't think at the moment we're seeing the volume for the social workers.
Thank you, Matt. Eric.
Thank you. Just was going to make a suggestion. If it seems like the concept of partnering with all the other local governments in Orange County on this, and it sounds like there is, maybe the quickest and easiest place to see how the other ones feel would be at the next mayors and chair meeting, just to have for Mayor Weaver to be able to find out. Maybe there's been similar discussions with Orange County, Chapel Hill, and Carrboro, and that is often the easiest way to get things started, is at the top level.
Thank you, Eric. That's a great suggestion. Dwayne.
I was just going to say, just to clarify, a lot of that county level conversation is happening and ongoing, and we are involved in that conversation. Most of the conversation has been focused on, resources, facility, but the conversation has also talked about, again, response groups and things like that. So just to make sure everybody knows that there is conversation along countywide. It's just, we're a part of that. It's just going to take time. It's a lot to unpack.
Thank you. And a follow-up to that, Dwayne, is the Orange County Behavioral Health Task Force. Do you have any idea of where they are in their process, or is that ongoing or COVID delayed? Or I just saw they were formed in 2019.
Right. Well, I think that they think they've come and gone a little bit, not been as consistent, but that's part of the group that started, about a year ago, has really started having more conversations. With the switch over from Cardinal to Alliance, that was they just had a meeting not that long ago, and that was a big part of the focus of it. So again, that's kind of the group that's working on these conversations. So it's been good conversation, but they haven't really gotten to an action point yet. But I think that's, again, what they're working toward.
Mayor Weaver?
Yes.
I know the last opioid task force meeting that I was on, there was a discussion of bringing together the opioid task force and the behavioral task force together in some form or fashion. And part of it has to do with the opioid monies coming down. How do we leverage that? Because they're so intertwined. So no resolution, but at least there's some conversation going on about that, which may or may not impact, but because, at least on law enforcement, because of the opioid crisis and behavioral together, have such an impact with people interacting in the criminal justice system. And the Criminal Justice Resource Center is also part of that as well. So it's all together.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, Eric and Matt, both of you still have your hands up. Is that intentional or?
Oh,
Right.
sorry.
What about you, Matt? Yours? Okay. So are there additional comments or questions on this general topic, or do we feel ready to move forward? All right.
I can, pardon me, I can say that I agree with what the chief says, and I agree with what Kathleen said, and I agree with what Matt said, and then I agree with what Mark said. And those are the ones, I mean, I can put them together. And I know I have ridden with the police. It's been some time, but I rode from something like 11 o'clock until 5 in the morning. And I saw what the stops they had. I did not see but one person get out of control, and he had been using cocaine, and then he switched, or he'd been using alcohol, and then he switched to cocaine. And he went completely nuts he was waiting for the magistrate. So I got in the car, so I didn't see that, but that was the only time out of probably 5 or 6 years that I rode with him that I saw anybody to get to that extreme. And I don't think anybody from a crisis situation could help him. He just needed to be hospitalized or something. He was in pretty bad shape. And that had really, and he was from another country. I think he was from maybe Venezuela or somewhere, and that was a problem. And he was sitting in Northern Fairview, and I can't remember the street, but the policeman came along. We came along, and we just noticed that he was sitting there, and he had been sitting there, and they came back around several times, and he was still sitting there. So you figured that he was dealing with probably cocaine, maybe, and then or alcohol. I don't know, but it was drug related. It wasn't a mental thing. And I really don't see having your own social worker at the police department, because it's just isn't going to work. But because I watch too many people who come in the drugstore who go to psychiatrists and that type thing, and they go, but they go every week or they go every 2 weeks, and they usually don't have to pay because they have assistance.
Thank you, Evelyn. So I think if this is an accurate, go ahead, Chief.
Sorry, I was gonna just ask if I could summarize real quick what I think I've heard here, if that would be okay.
That's great. That's what I was about to do, but you go right ahead.
All right. Well, I would say for the first recommendation, it sounds like the board is okay with our current plan to continue to collaborate and focus on some sort of county-wide, response models, be a part of that conversation. And our plan would be as that conversation advances to anything actionable, we come back to you all and kind of let you know what's going on. Crisis intervention and the training, it sounds like the board is supportive of what we're doing. If we can find more or find a way to make more happen, we'll certainly engage with that. And it sounds like as far as the recommendation, focusing on a social worker, maybe that's not the right fit for us to spend the energy exploring right now, and kind of put that on a lower list of priorities while we work through the rest of these. That anybody disagree with that?
I'm seeing nodding of heads. And I think the only thing that I would add to that is that, my sense from all the comments that board members have made is that we are supportive of the spirit of these recommendations. People really understand that there is an issue and that people who are in mental health crisis really do need help, and that our system is not speaking broadly, is not doing a great job of being sure that people have what they need. But that Hillsborough as a town doesn't necessarily have the resources or capacity to meet those ourselves. But we're interested in partnering with others and thinking creatively about how to meet some of these needs moving forward, and just remembering that it is a thing that people are experiencing. Is that, I hope that is supportive as well. All right, yeah.
And Mayor, if
Dwayne,
I could
go
just add, I don't think anything in this list, I guess from my perspective, we're not throwing anything in this list away. We're kind of building some priorities, and then as we move and figure out what our next step is, there may be folks from the task force that maybe want to speak on some of these things that we've kind of put on the lower priority for now. So again, just trying to get a sense of, okay, where we need to be, where do we need more conversation? What are the things that maybe can wait until we deal with the others? So that's kind of how I'm trying to package it in my head.
that computes. Thank you. Okay, the next category of recommendations is in the field of traffic stops. And as I learn as I go along, I think I'm going to read the recommendation out loud and then let Chief Hampton kind of say a little bit about each one, and then go through the questions, if that's okay. So the first one is to expand current traffic stop reporting data set to include all significant citizen interactions, including but not limited to public complaints, use of force incidents, marijuana arrests, community events, mental health crises, and vehicle pursuits. So Dwayne, you want to just respond to that a little bit? I know it's in the packet, but I think it'll just be helpful to voice it again.
Right. Basically the response we had was kind of like, to a point, many of these things we already report data on. There are some that we haven't really reported data on. To be honest, no one's ever really asked until all of this focus happened. That's fine. We're working now on trying to build more ways to report out more stuff because the transparency is important. Some of the things, again, we don't really have a model for what that would be. And the one danger with data is no matter how much data we produce, people are always going to ask for more data. And we are a small agency. It's a challenge to get buried under too much data. So, it really helps us to kind of try to figure out what is it people really want to know? What do they want to understand about these various pieces of information? Most of these things we've already reported out pretty regularly. I think we're working on and Eli did a lot of work on this before she moved over to HR, on trying to develop a little bit more of a quarterly reporting to cover kind of a transparency type report to cover some of these areas. And it's something we're working to refine because, again, you can get lost and buried in this data and the information. And, some of these things don't really report well in data. It's very difficult, for example, to really describe what kind of mental health stuff our officers are responding to in simple data charts, because every single one can be very different, very complicated. It can involve lots of stuff. And there's a huge varied range. So we're trying to find a way to get enough information out to answer the questions people have, but at the same time, not soaking up 2 or 3 people's worth of time trying to pull all this data. A lot of our systems were not really designed for this data work, even like traffic stop reporting. We have what we have largely because of the system the state put in place, was well ahead of a lot of people. But even it doesn't capture so much nuance that happens. So we are working on this one. It's just, again, trying to figure out where the sweet spot is of being transparent, giving as much information and giving information people want and need, rather than giving information no one's ever going to look at, because then that's using up a lot of energy.
Thank you. Questions, comments on this first recommendation?
Mayor
Catherine.
Weaver, I have a couple thoughts, and part of it's because in my professional life, I deal with statisticians. And so the thing about statistics is everyone likes them and few people actually understand what they're communicating. And I appreciate, Chief's, approach of trying to provide us data. I share some of the same concerns. I have yet to be around anything where, there's still a push, and it's because we're curious. We want to know, we see possibilities, but we have to caution people, just because we can collect it doesn't mean we should. And just because we're reporting it as data doesn't mean that it's really informative of what we think it's informative. So I appreciate, all of this is to say, I really appreciate the interest in, so that we have evidence, database, decision making, and we're able to capture what the state of things are. At the same time, I appreciate the caution of, are we collecting not for the sake of collecting, but also when you throw out data to, and this is in any arena, and I'll use my they're professionals and they still don't understand what the data actually is communicating, because data is complicated. And it's, when you have a good infographic or a good table, it's deceiving because it makes it look simple. So anyhow, I think that's just more food for thought for us to continue to be considering. And I really like the fact that we're trying to find what's a sensible balance to make sure we have that transparency, which is so critically important, without unintentionally misleading people because they don't understand what it actually represents, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. Mark, and then Chief Hampton.
In the work that I've done in other states that involve law enforcement and healthcare, I frequently saw where the systems that law enforcement use sometimes didn't capture as discrete data elements that which other agencies wanted to be reported on. So it was backbreaking for the agencies to mine the free text fields, looking for the right terms or the right situations that to put into a report. And I think, Dwayne, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I asked a similar question, which is, does the system that we use, is it capable of capturing what it is we need to report? Or do we need to think about investing additional resources or upgrades to get a platform that actually meets all the needs?
I'm gonna take that to make sure that was a question, sorry. The short answer is there isn't one. There is no system, no law enforcement agency, none of our record systems answer all the questions people want asked of them. If we're able, and kind of going to what Commissioner Ferguson was saying, crunching the data out of our system is back-breaking work. Eli did an amazing amount of work, but probably for periods of 80% of her time were spent trying to match up data sets from different modules within our system, because they're not designed to overlap that way. The systems were not designed for that purpose. They were designed to collect some statistical data information, but it's very specific. So when we start trying to break that to get to what we want to get to, it becomes very complicated. It still leaves that problem unanswered, which you referred to, the data that we need. We're still not 100% sure what that is. What are folks not getting that they want to get? What are we not producing that we need to be putting out there among all of this information? There are some aftermarket, some other products we can look into but we don't really know anything about them. I know that there's a system that's designed to kind of crunch through some of these record systems and be able to pull stuff out. But most of the people I know who have used this and are good at using it have spent 10 or 15 years learning how to use it, because it's not the most user friendly. I think it's called Crystal Reports. It's designed to pull stuff out of database systems. But even then, I don't know if it will be able to do what we're trying to do. So the short answer is the system that we use that collects all of our data is linked to the county system, Chapel Hill, Carborough. We're all kind of linked together using the same product. So to go away from that product just to get data is going to create huge problems on another end. We can look at some of these products. They're not cheap, but even then, I don't know that we have necessarily the expertise to know if they're going to give us more information, than what we're able to put out without maybe not necessarily killing ourselves. So it's complicated to answer. Our system is limited. There are things we can do to perhaps tap into that a little bit more. They're not inexpensive. And, the problem is I just don't know if it will actually make a difference in what we're able to put out versus what people really want to know about.
Crystal Reports, I am familiar with, and you need a data scientist and I'm not kidding. It's and a lot of what we're doing, I mean, it's too bad you're not in SAS, because a lot of what people want really is statistics, and you run in the data sets and derived variables and running true statistics and true reporting. And that's a whole different ballgame. And actually, as I'm talking out loud, that may be another area where collectively at a county level, on one hand, UNC is, I mean, granted, their statisticians are snapped up by industry pretty darn quick, but we are sitting in a global hub of statistical talent. And at the county level, it may be worthwhile investing in statistical resources who can, run some of these selective, because the other piece, a lot of what we are talking about is more than just statistics. You're getting into epidemiology. And again, in a science that is not, it doesn't live in police departments, but at a county level, leveraging some of these resources, we may be able to get to some of this information at a county level where we can drill down, but it begins with, having the skill set. And I don't think it's fair to ask, folks in a police department who are not trained data scientists to try to become one. And again, we don't have the budget to afford what it will take to hire and keep one. As someone that I'm always trying to recruit, we can't afford them. But I do think there's maybe an opportunity at the county level and collectively investing there and really looking, and again, partnering with the university. We have some really good resources that we may be able to creatively tap.
Dwayne, go right ahead.
Just as a follow-up to that's all valid. The other piece we have to keep in mind is no matter how robust our data analysis abilities are, we don't have much data. So we can analyze something really great, but if we only have 50 of them a year, it's going to vary year to year in ways that all that effort is not going to tell us anything.
Sure.
And that's the piece we've got to keep in mind, is compared to a lot of the bigger agencies, the amount of data we've got to actually really look at data is very limited. The sense I get from talking to people, and this may be somewhere we're down the road having more conversation with the task force, trying to understand what they really meant. I get the sense people want the stories. They want to understand why things happened, what happened. If we have a use of force, they want to know, what was the circumstances, and that's not something data really captures. It's something we have to figure out ways to tell the story. Fortunately, we're small enough, we can tell the story. If I only have, 30 or 40, of a particular incident, I can give a little bit better information. It's all manual, it's all labor intensive, it's all reading a 2-page report and figuring out how to boil it down into a paragraph. But I think that's where, to me, our focus should be, is telling more of the story rather than trying to focus on the data analysis, because in most of these circumstances, we simply don't have enough data that story is going to be valuable. So thank you.
I think, and actually, but to me, that points to the county level, because collectively there may be, enough data where it's statistically significant. I totally would expect at our town level, it would not be statistically significant.
Thank you. I would love to jump in and offer a couple things based on what you all have said and asked so far. One of those is being that one thing that came up and in discussions with the task force were two things that I just want to throw out there that aren't totally captured here. One of them is that as we've talked about in previous board meetings, it is very common in the community for people don't necessarily differentiate between law enforcement agencies. Many people are not mindful of whether it's HPD or a sheriff, and they get clumped together a lot. And when we're thinking about our own policy making, though I think your suggestion, Kathleen, there could be something to learn from that countywide analysis for sure, as all these jurisdictions are going through this. One of the things I keep thinking about is we want to be sure we know what we're talking about with our own agency. So that's just something to keep in mind as we press forward. And then the other thing is that in our discussions on the task force, it is something I really felt, something I heard from the members, is that many of them just did not know about the reporting that the police department already does. The reports that they give at our monthly meetings. Most of them did not know that there's the community summits, that those happened. And so part of the solution or way to address this, I think, could be really thinking more about how to effectively communicate out that data that is being collected and reported, how to be sure that the community knows that it's there, that it's available, and that it's, where to go and find it. So I don't necessarily have but I do part puzzle. Matt.
I was just going to say, I think, Mayor, you hit the nail on the head also about just all of the different agencies that do have jurisdiction in Hillsborough specifically. I mean, we have Highway Patrol, we have Sheriff's Department, we have, partners over at the hospital. I'm sure there are maybe other jurisdictions I'm not thinking of that might be operating in Hillsborough. And so even when we make these changes, we have other law enforcement agencies that are still responding to certain things. I know some of the recommendations here are about regulatory stops, but regulatory stops may still be done by the Sheriff's Department or State Highway Patrol. And so I think making sure that we think about and being mindful as we communicate to the community, like we're doing this in our little world of our little corner of the universe that we have control over. But there are other agencies out there that may or may not be doing the same things as we are. And so because I think, Chief did say in an email to me that, law enforcement's law enforcement, no matter who it happens to be. And so, we all kind of get pegged in a good way or a bad way with other agencies. So, I think also as we go through adopting any recommendations that we really have to say, this is only our agency within the confines of our little piece of Orange County.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Eric.
Just to build on a few of the points that I think everybody made here. One thing under the action items that Chief Hampton listed of things they're working on and planning on doing in response to all of this that I thought was important was the developing the quarterly reporting system. And as the mayor just mentioned about, hey, a lot of folks don't know that we do have data, and making it more available to folks is a win. But going back to Chief Hampton's point about people want to hear the stories and understand what's going on. And because we're a small community, that, it's easier for us to understand what's going on when we can have a conversation and dialogue. So having the quarterly data coming up, sending that out, however it goes out, allows for more frequent conversations than just once a year. So kudos to the chief for, I know the system isn't done yet, but I think that is a big move forward in the right direction.
Thank you, Eric. All right, and Eric, thank you for bringing up the part of the whole point of this is that there are action items listed to address this to better get at communicating that data out to the public. Any other comments or questions on this one? Evelyn?
I don't have any questions, but I have, in the News of Orange, there's a section of incidents. And half the time, I suppose they're all police and not sheriff. It doesn't say. But whoever, I think Kathleen might have said, somebody said, people don't know sheriff, even though you see somebody in a uniform, they don't know a police. They always tell me, well, the police stopped me. Well, it wasn't the police, it was sheriff. And so they don't, I don't know what you do, whether you put a picture of one of each in the paper and say, this is a policeman and this is a deputy. Is that what you do? But people don't know. And they said they stopped me and they don't know highway patrolman either, unless they stop you. And I grant you, when they stop you, they probably, I've never been stopped by one, but I don't want to be stopped by one. And I think the police is doing a very good job. I don't hear any, I really don't hear complaints. It's just, they don't really know the difference between what the sheriff does and what the police do. And then there's a fire department. I mean, they get everything confused. But I will tell you that you do have the News of Orange sell papers.
That is true. Thank you. Yeah, we do get confused. There's no doubt about that. Chief Hampton.
I was just going to follow Commissioner Lloyd's point is when we do our Citizens Academy and even some of the annual community summit presentations and community meetings, one of the things we do talk about with people is that difference between police and sheriff and highway patrol. So, we do try to educate them in that, but it's, we touch a very small number of people when we do that. So it is a point of confusion for folks that's out there. And we're trying to address it as we can, but it just takes folks learning.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Mayor Weaver, is this where we're talking about the traffic stops also, or is that the next one? I'm not.
That's the next one.
Okay,
But,
I was like, some of the numbering and the way we're talking about things, I'm not sure.
Well, things are definitely related. So
Okay.
it's so if I could sum up with that recommendation is that the HPD has some action items that they are working on to address this, and that this might be something where when we have if there's a way to, if we decide to engage directly with task force members, this might be something we want to find out a little bit more about exactly what it is they're looking for that they are not seeing. Is that an accurate summary? Okay, thank you. All right. Number 2, make a commitment within the Hillsborough Police Department to not pull people over by using the traffic code as a pretext for suspect criminal behavior. Limit the investigation during a traffic stop to the reason for the stop, except for situations that pose a risk to public safety. Kathleen, before we jump into questions and comments, if we could just give Chief, if you
Sorry.
could give a brief summary of your response to this, and then we'll move on to the Q&A.
Sorry, I dropped the ball on that. I
That's
wasn't paying
okay.
attention to our process. My bad.
It's all right.
This one is really challenging for us. I think some of this is to some extent folks struggling to understand what we do and how we do things. The vast majority of stops that officers make, they're making the stop based on whatever it is they've seen that someone's done wrong. But once they've got someone stopped, to kind of present a situation, oh, well, you can't, we don't want you to look any further. That's hard, because that's what we've trained our officers to do, is to always, assess situations, look at what's going on. We want them to investigate if they have a suspicion, because that's kind of what their job is. They ask the questions that a lot of people maybe are too polite to ask or don't want to ask. This one is a challenging one. I understand the intent of it. We don't want, officers just making traffic stops as an excuse to harass people. That's the image that we have here. But again, that's not necessarily what's going on. Now, there are times and places when the traffic code does give officers an opportunity to interact with somebody. We're watching a drug house, we see some suspicious activity. Maybe it's not quite enough to justify that level of suspicion we need all by itself for a traffic stop. But, oh, look, they got a headlight out. Well, let's stop and just kind of check on things real quick. Or I think the example I used in here that's even more common is the neighborhood that's had a lot of car break-ins, and all of a sudden at 3 o'clock in the morning, an officer's cruising through and sees a car kind of slowly rolling through the neighborhood, and then the car sees the officer and speeds up a little bit. Yes, it's suspicious. Is it reasonable suspicion from a legal standard all by itself to stop the car? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. But again, if the car has a taillight out, the officer has a reason to stop that vehicle to make sure everything's okay. So this becomes one of those things where there's a mixed bag to it. We don't want it to be abused, but at the same time, it is something that we want officers to have in their toolkit when they use it. The vast majority of stops we look at, any kind of suspicion of something outside of whatever they're stopping them for develops often after they've stopped the vehicle. They walk up to the car and they smell alcohol, or they walk up to the car and all of a sudden they see a catalytic converter laying on the back seat. That's what we call a clue in law enforcement. So we want them to investigate those things. So that's kind of our perspective, is this is something we have to make sure and keep an eye on, which we do through our body cam reviews, our complaint process, our traffic stop data. We're looking at all these things to make sure, we're not abusing what's available to us, but at the same time, we're still have that tool available when it is needed. This is an area where, do we have the data to show how many times after we've stopped somebody, we've had to investigate or do something unrelated to the reason of the stop? And the answer is no. The search data that we rely on is one of the biggest examples of this. Is, everybody's trying to make conclusions about the result of a search. The traffic stop data doesn't really give us that information very well. We know that they stopped the car for a violation. We know that they did a search. We know that there was an arrest. We don't know that those three things are connected in any way, shape, or form. They could have stopped the car for speeding. They could have done a search because they smelled marijuana, and they made an arrest because they found the guy had a warrant. None of those three things are connected. So that becomes one of those challenges in the data sometimes. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Kathleen.
Yeah, I actually wanted to understand a little bit more about how we keep an eye on things so that it's a properly used tool. When I think of when there were 3 drug houses and prostitution and fencing stolen goods next door to me. Frankly, as Neighborhood Watch, when partnering with HPD, traffic stops was the only tool we had because the magistrates wouldn't allow arrests to happen, and it was a bad scene until we were able to, chase the chase it away. I'm very hesitant to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then I think of, and granted, I don't think it's happened in Hillsborough, and I hope to God it hasn't. But I think of if you're a murderino and watching the crime shows and seeing where there's some really nasty folks that get stopped. Ted Bundy is the poster child of through the traffic stops, and that is, like I said, those types of folks are the exception rather than the rule. But the folks of the arms trafficking, which there is a lot of, the human trafficking, the drug trafficking coming, that's on our interstates and coming through town, I'm more concerned with that and making sure we have our officers do have the tools. Not the low level stuff, but some of this, and ensuring that there's that level of safety on the streets. But at the same time, going back to what my core question is if you can share a little bit more, how do we check and use the tools we have to verify that we're using these tools in a best practice, useful manner as opposed to abusive manner. And I've certainly never gotten any reports that we are using in an abusive manner. So I'm not asking coming from my hearing complaints, but in terms of what do we have in place, process, procedures, that sort of thing that survives personality in leadership and in our police department, so that where culture leaves off, policy and procedure leads on. I hope that made sense.
Right, it does. I'm going to lead with kind of a statement that we've used in a lot of training and a lot of things around the law enforcement profession, and that's that culture is going to eat policy and procedure for breakfast every day.
Yes.
So no matter how good our policy is, if our culture is bad, we're in a bad situation to start with. There's a lot of pieces in place that we use. One, we rely on the supervisors to be paying attention to what their folks are doing, be checking in, to be asking questions. We also use the data. We take a look at stuff. If we have officers that are just constantly stopping people for very, very minor petty situations and without any kind of real articulable reason, those are things we start looking at to kind of find out, hey, what are you doing? We have the body worn cameras, so we're doing random auditing of those. The supervisors will, watch a stop and they'll look at the reasons for it. A lot of these stops result in something, not a lot, that's not fair. Some of these stops result in something else. They result in something that ends up becoming reportable. The vast majority result in an officer providing a little education. Hey, your license plate's expired. Please get that taken care of. Here's a warning. Thank you. That's 90% of them probably. But some do result in an arrest. They result in the officers finding something. Some of them do result in bad people being found. I mean, we've served a lot of warrants on fairly significant things that are just coming through Hillsborough. And those are, again, an opportunity to review. We make sure what the officer's doing, why they're doing it. There's a lot of ways this can be used in inappropriate manner. If the officers are only watching stop signs in one neighborhood, that's a problem. If we see that overbalance, we hear that overbalance of stops, that's where we start going, all right, look, we need to make sure we're spreading the wealth equally. I think our officers use that discretion and the tool very well. And that's one of the things I'm really proud of. We see that in our in our enforcement actions. We're not out there writing tons of tickets. Our officers use a lot of discretion because they believe in the education. We just want people to get this stuff fixed. That's the number one thing. I know personally, my vehicle, I've had vehicles in the past that didn't have a light out warning. So I have lights out and I don't know it. And I've had people point it out to me, or, the tags being expired. People just forget, or they forget to put the stickers on. I'd rather we stop and get them corrected, make sure they're getting it done so it doesn't become something that they got to deal with in another time. But again, we look at the body cam, we look at what supervisors are doing, we look for trends, we look for patterns, and we have a complaint process. Somebody posts on Facebook, jerk officer stopped me for no reason. We're going to investigate that internally. We're going to count it as a complaint. And we look into it. We try to find out what happened, why it happened. So again, we provide a lot of opportunities to get that feedback from folks that, hey, I think I was treated unfairly. And we've had situations like that happen. We've had people who got stopped for having a light out on the back of their car, a tail light or whatever. They got home. When they looked at their car, the light was working again and they complained. And we go back and pull the body cam and find out the moment the officer stopped them, it actually wasn't working. We captured it on video. So they have some sort of intermittent problem with theirs. But again, we take all these very seriously. So those are the layers we use. And again, the other layer is culture. We don't want piddly charges for silly things. We want to use discretion. We want to educate. We want to be able to still protect the community, especially kind of late at night when we have opportunities for an interaction, because a lot of bad people are floating around late at night. A lot of good people are too. So we got to make sure that if we make the stop, if there's nothing to it, we take care of whatever we need to take care of, issue the warning, send them on their way. And for the most part, that appears to be what officers are doing on a regular routine basis.
Is that something that we can verify with data that doesn't take a data scientist to get to?
Not in any way, shape, or form that I could think of.
Okay. Because I'm trying to think ahead of ways to communicate that to the community so that they are aware not only of what we say the culture is, but a way that we can verify, demonstrate, confirm.
That could be a possible community summit topic as well, just to throw out one idea.
This is one of those areas where it's one of these things that's very hard to proof with data. We can't proof that it's happening the wrong way. We certainly can't have proof it's happening the right way very well. I think we have very, very, very few complaints that even touch on this, maybe one or two people a year. So, that's a data point, but it's a very incomplete data point. So, it's not something I want to hang my hat on. But it certainly, is an area we look at to kind of say, okay, we're not hearing this concern from the people that we're interacting with, but they may just not be complaining. We don't know. But again, we've got the supervisors, we've got the random audits, we've got the complaint process, and we're not really seeing any flags in any of those. But how I package that in a way for folks to feel good about, I'm not really sure how to do that.
Thank you, Chief. Matt.
Chief, I have a question, or maybe this is good for the mayor as well. One of the traffic stop recommendations, it's in the short detail. And then when I went back and I read the longer detail, I'm not really sure what it meant. The first was implement use of a written consent card, which seemed good in the short version. But when I read it, it almost reads in a way that kind of contradicts itself, where it seems like there's a recommendation to use a written consent card. I assume that's for maybe a search or something. But then it seems like in the same paragraph that the authors also acknowledge that the data shows that as maybe these cards are used, that the use of them go down and that probable cause goes up, and therefore you're kind of back to square one. Do you have any insight as to what the recommendation is and really kind of what it's used for?
Sure, I will give an attempt. Why don't I give an attempt just from kind of facilitating that some of those discussions, and then Dwayne, you want to jump in with probably some good detail that my explanation won't necessarily have. So first of all, I just want to say that this whole topic about traffic stops, and I think this is really important for board members to remember from a policy making perspective, is that this is a topic because Hillsborough, and it should be said, like every other jurisdiction in the state, that has the data shows a disproportionate number of African Americans arrested as opposed to white people arrested. So there's it's that disproportionate piece in the data that is concerning. And so these topics are kind of ways where the task force was thinking about how do we get at that. And Frank Baumgardner from UNC came and did a presentation. And that's all, I don't know if anyone was able to watch that meeting, but there's, I think and hope we still have that meeting recorded. So anyway, that's the background of where this is coming from. And Matt, I just want to say that your question, I think, is a good one. And I'll just say that I was a little bit confused by that also. But I think that just based on the discussions that task force members had when they were formulating their recommendations, is that at the end of the day, they still thought it was, preferable to have that consent part.
Okay, what do you mean? You have to have a card. The policeman you have to say that it's okay to search the car. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Well, when I rode, and it's been years before he came, the officer would stop a car, and you would know, and the person had been drinking. You saw the cans in the car, and he also was looking. I mean, it was a suspicious car. You would think it had marijuana or something in it. So he would say, "Is it okay with you if I search your car?" And the guy would always say, "Yes, we don't care." And so heavens knows what you might find. You might find nothing, but most of the time you did. And they found drugs and who knows what. I don't remember guns, but I remember something that was rolled up like a cigar. What is that they had in it's in the trunk? You know what I'm talking about? But they found that. And I mean, the guy said, "Sure, check the car." I mean, you said, why does he have to sign a card?
Well, the idea behind this is that, and then I'll hand it over to Dwayne, is that many people are not aware of what their rights are, and when they can say yes to a search, or when they're allowed to say no to a search, and what the implications are.
Yeah, I know, but they know. They know.
Right, Chief,
I
do
can
you wanna-
see his point on that. And I think he would agree with me. I think it's unnecessary. If you get stopped, if they want to stop me, if they want to go through my car, fine. They won't. Be my guest. Maybe they'll clean it out.
I mean, I guess, it's.
All right, Dwayne, why don't you go? Wait, hold on, Kathleen, hold on one second. I want to give Dwayne a chance to fill in the blanks there, and then Matt's had his hand up for a while, or maybe he took it down. Maybe you changed your mind. Okay.
Yeah, if you would, let me fill in a few blanks on this one. Just for clarity and process, we've kind of moved on to number 4 in this discussion, and we skipped over ones. I just didn't want folks to lose that one. The gist of this recommendation is the idea of saying for any consent searches, there should be a written consent card with the idea and the intent of being concerned about people who aren't aware, they're giving uninformed consent. And that's the idea behind it. There are a lot of agencies that have gone to these. And the data confusion he's talking about in this is that what you find in a lot of agencies is you'll find that they did a lot of consent searches, and all of a sudden they put this written consent form into existence. And all of a sudden you see consent searches kind of go away and probable cause searches increase. The reality of that is because these things don't happen in isolation. If officers walk up to a car and they smell marijuana, they potentially have probable cause to do a search right at that point. But a smart officer is going to have conversation and is going to ask for consent. Because if we go into court with both probable cause and consent, we're kind of bulletproof when it comes to the defense. So what you're seeing is folks were asking for consent when they really didn't have to a lot. And then when consent became something that was more difficult to get, because let's be honest, when you give someone a piece of paper and say, sign this, somebody who may have been like, oh yeah, you can search my car, and be like, whoa, wait a minute, you want me to sign something? And we start having people back away from that. The officers just move to the probable cause, ditch the consent aspect. From my perspective on that one, it's one of those things where if you look at our use of consent, it is extremely limited. We do not do a lot of consent searches. And when you read the story behind the consent search, you're like, oh, of course. And some of them turn up with stuff, some of them don't. A lot of our officers were marking things as consent searches, and you read underlying they had probable cause anyway. They didn't even have to ask for consent. So from my perspective, it's one of those, is the juice worth the squeeze to create a form and the bureaucracy that comes with a form when we're in a paperless system? Because now I got to find a way to create the form, track the form, follow up on the form. The 8 consent searches we do a year will potentially go down to 0 or 1 or 2. And you may see something else come up because that's what these searches really are. So I think it's just, there's a lot of nuance around searches that the data does not capture well. Like I said before, you stop them for speeding, you search because you smell marijuana, you arrest for a warrant. When you look at the data, it looks like we stopped a car, searched, and arrested for the search, when there's no connection among those things whatsoever.
Okay.
So yeah, that was just wanted to clarify kind of how those work a little bit.
Well, that was a long time ago too. It's been a while since I've ridden because I can't get in the car because you have so much equipment.
And to be clear, we're requiring our officers to have their cameras on when they make that consent request. So if they somehow try to trick somebody or talk them into it, anything they get is going to get lost in court. They know that. That's part of our training. It doesn't do us any good to get a kilo of cocaine out of a consent search only to have the consent go away. That is shooting ourselves in the foot, so to speak. So we, again, and what I like about the camera is you get exactly what the officer said, exactly, that becomes subject to the whole court process. If we were an agency that was doing lots and lots of consent searches, to me, it's a little more understandable because again, it's a tool that's maybe being overused. There's this idea that just officers are just asking for consent anytime they, just phishing, complete and total phishing. And I don't think our officers are doing that. There's always some underlying suspicion that's driving that request, because otherwise they're wasting a lot of time, and they know that. So usually it's somebody they know, they've had past history with. There's something going on with the person at that moment that's just really making the officer feel like something's up. I think that's good investigation that we need to kind of make sure we keep cultivated, because we do want our officers to ask those difficult questions sometimes.
Thank you. Kevin, did you change your mind?
Well, I was just going to add, I've heard anecdotally, and this is not from Orange County, but elsewhere in the state, the consent cards can also sometimes be problematic for the prosecutors if, like Chief Hampton mentioned, a driver starts asking questions about what rights are they waiving, and imprecise explanations from an officer can theoretically, particularly on video, come across as coercive for defense. And so it's another reason, like I said, from other counties, but folks I know that are working as prosecutors are running into that issue as well, of having to work around an imprecise or inaccurate explanation of the consent card that, ultimately a driver signs without really understanding what it is that they're signing in the first place. So it's a solution that maybe sometimes creates additional or other new problems.
Rob?
So Chief, just to clarify your HPD alternative on this, you're saying that standardizing language by having some sort of some kind of standard language, I guess, that the officers would read, similar to Miranda rights, and then capturing on the body camera kind of eliminates the need for written consent forms. It takes care of all that, correct?
In my opinion, it eliminates us keeping track of a piece of paper. I mean, if we're going to do this, to me, that's a much cleaner way. There's better documentation. It's easier for the officers to share and get that across. That is, if we're going to have to do it, that's the way I'd go. Again, yes, just to eliminate the paper, because that piece of paper is just kind of a headache to figure out how we deal with it for 8 or 9 a year.
Yeah, and I like that recommendation. So I just want to put my 2 cents in for that, because I think we're, hopefully moving away from paper. I know we are in a lot of ways, but take advantage of technology. It's already there. Thank you.
Kathleen?
I'm trying to, one of the things I'm trying to figure out on this, I mean, you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And if you have something to hide, you're absolutely going to say no. That's my instinctual thinking. But Chief, what happens in real life? And because here's the thing, is the problem because people are getting searched and where they have done bad things and getting busted and don't like being busted? Or is it a problem where we are busting people who are not doing anything and we're trying to stop that? I'm trying to grapple with what the real problem we're trying to solve, because I still think if you ain't done anything wrong, there is no fear. If there's something, then nefarious, and then it gets into a question of, are you aware of whether or not there's something that is against the law or not? I don't know. So I guess I'm really trying to grapple, what's the officer's experience with our implementation? And I'm trying to get a feel for what problem are we really solving? Because if people are upset they're getting busted, I'm having a hard time. But if we're having where people are truly, they're law-abiding folk and are getting caught up unnecessarily because we've got some overzealousness or abuse, that's a whole different ballgame that we would need to address. So I'm just trying to understand what we're trying to solve. What is the court? What's our problem? And is it a perception thing? Is it real?
Yeah, let's give Dwayne, you want to respond to that?
Sure. So a couple things about it. There are people that have bad stuff in their car that still say yes to consent. And I've talked to them in my career, and they've been like, well, I figured if I said yes, you wouldn't actually look. People who are doing bad things don't like to get caught. They are unhappy. I understand that. I would be unhappy if I were doing bad things and getting caught too. I think this is the recommendation seems to be a reflection of societal concern, that there are those people who are getting caught up in this system. They don't know their rights. They're saying yes when they really aren't comfortable with it, whether they have things in their car or not. So I think it's just that societal concern of making sure folks are informed. They know that they can say no. I don't have any data on how often we're told no. I have no idea. I don't think we ask all that much. Again, so I think it's not a perspective. I know I've been told no in my career, but my career of street traffic was a long time ago. The reality is, what I'm seeing with our officers, if someone gives consent and we search their car and we find something, if it's minor and they've given consent, that's almost always a pathway to a warning. We're not charging folks for that because those are piddly things, and somebody cooperated with us. If they've got marijuana, we'll seize the marijuana, we turn it in, we say, look, that's a bad idea. You don't want to do that anymore. And that's the way it ends. Now, if they give us consent and they have a kilo of cocaine in the trunk, that's an entirely different problem, And a lot of these consent situations they're really minor and fast. And if we add process to it, they become much more complicated. A great example is one I looked at a little while back where the officer stopped a person. They smelled alcohol in the person's breath and they saw an alcohol container in the console, but couldn't tell if it was open or not. And they said, hey, is that alcohol container open? And the person, we're counting that as a consent search at that point because we didn't have enough to search. Just the odor of alcohol alone is not enough to do the search until we get a lot more. But just the officer asking. So you see this quick interaction that's a consent search and it's dealt with. And a lot of them are that way. The officer sees something, says, hey, can I look at that? What is that? And the person cooperates. I struggle with what is the problem. I agree 100%. We want to make sure it's not being abused. The fact that we do so few and they're spread across all our officers and not all of them I have data on. Literally 8. I think 6 of the 8, the officers had some notes and stuff I could go look at. And every one of them was like, yep, I see why they did that. Yep, I see why they did that. So it's not just a random fishing expedition. So I think it's trying to balance that tension that exists between, again, making sure officers are not abusing this tool, are not, fishing and making people uncomfortable. But by the same token, if somebody does have something they shouldn't have that might be a danger to our community, we want to get that out of our community. On the flip side, if they have something they shouldn't have that's really not that big a deal, then we should use discretion the right way. And that is what seems to be happening through these stops that we've reviewed. So I hope that kind of answered what you were looking for.
No, that helps me understand. I appreciate it. Thanks.
And if I could just add a couple more thoughts to that before, Matt, I see you have your hand up, is that one of the things that Dr. Bumgardner talked about when he presented to us and we were, the task force was talking about this, is that when the data shows that African Americans and to a slightly lesser degree Hispanic people there's a higher likelihood disproportionate to their population that they will be searched once they're stopped. Then that can, even if they have done nothing wrong, then that helps create distrust, and feelings of alienation. So I think that that's part of what this is trying to address and get at. And then I forgot the other thing I was
But actually, I'm glad you said that because it raises another question that's related, which is if we've got these on body cams, is there a way, and again, I don't know how you can do this without having a data scientist, but I'm going to ask anyway. We have a body of traffic stop footage. Can we see from that data what differences there are in those? And it's not the numbers, but it really is what are those events that are happening that lead to the numbers. You know, even if it were a statistical sample, not just a non-statistical, but a statistical sample would give us some insights. Because that's the other question is there's data, but what's behind the data? And I don't have any, I've never seen us address that, and I've never seen that addressed. I've only seen that surface data. And I want to have a better understanding of what that data really means. Is it, and I understand about the data of the traffic stops. I think that's unequivocal. But is there more to it that we might need to address from some different angles, by comparing what the interactions? And again, I don't know if it's even doable without a data scientist.
Well,
or a random sample, a statistically meaningful random sample.
just to be clear, there is no statistically significant number that will ever exist when you have 8. We don't do a lot of these stops. Now, anecdotally, yes, and that's one of the things with our quarterly report. We're trying to kind of find out, how do we tell these stories about these consent searches? Because the number of factors that go into them are hundreds. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that come into play. We know the person, we know the car, we got a call about something like it, that the person's extremely nervous, or they're saying strange things. There's all these factors that the officers may consider when deciding, and it's almost a social science exercise of what creates that decision to ask for consent.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to unpack with that. So, I mean, we're trying to, that is one of the things we're trying to work on. If we have 8, we can tell those stories. If we have 80, I can't tell those stories. But, in terms of statistics, there's just so few of these things that are out there. And to the mayor's point as well, Dr. Baumgartner did a lot of really great work, but there's a lot of danger in the search data because it's not connected well. So it's very hard to understand. The disproportion we see in searches is the same we see in traffic stops, same we see as an arrest, same we see across all of our systems. So again, it becomes very complicated. It's like, what's the population set we really need to be comparing to here? Our thing is to be able to look at these searches and make sure there's reason for what the officers are doing and why. But when you're looking at 8 consent searches, now when you look at the broader number of searches, the same thing exists, the same, differentiation, the imbalance exists, whether it's a probable cause search or a search incident to arrest, and these other classifications of searches that we track as well. So it's very hard to unpack this data in a meaningful way. In many ways, one of the things that will make the disparities less is doing less of something. And that, again, becomes problematic from a law enforcement perspective. So we're trying to find ways to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, how can we make it, more effective? How can we make sure that we're doing it the right way? And that's what we're focused on. But I'm hoping, like I said, the quarterly reports will be able to tell a little bit more of those stories. That searches is one of those areas we've never really reported out any data. I mean, it's all in the traffic stop module. You can get it all through the SBI, but it doesn't tell the story. It just gives numbers, and there's a lot behind those numbers that we don't fully understand.
Thank you. Matt.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I want to just kind of center something here, and that is, I get maybe there's only 8 of these or so that happen in a year, and that there is some record keeping, but I do think we have to have some appreciation that there are folks who maybe it's not them, but there might be reasons why folks might have suspicion of law enforcement, even if they've not themselves been justice involved, and having something that really gives them what their rights are, what's occurring and whatnot, I think can go a long way. I've been pulled over by law enforcement officers, state highway patrol, et cetera. um, I personally think that, even if I've done nothing wrong, it's an aggravating, anxiety inducing episode to have blue lights behind you. And so, you might be on edge. You might be, kind of worried about, what's going on, especially, sometimes sometimes you don't. And it's a leading question when you're asked, do you know why you've been pulled over? So, I think we should have a little bit of empathy about why folks might want to know what their rights are and whatnot. And, I think personally that would extend to inviting officers into your home. That, maybe a lot of folks don't know the implication of when the officers arrive. Maybe there's been a call or something, and you say, oh yeah, come on in. So I think kind of allowing people to understand what they're consenting to at any given moment, I think would be something that is, if nothing else, then just really allows people to understand the situation they find themselves in, even if it's not a lot. And I'm sure there's a lot more instances of, getting a call and officers entering a home. And then there are, a vehicle search. Of course, we're talking about, what can we do to reduce disparities? But I think, some sort of informed consent on these issues could go a long way with a lot of populations, even if it's potentially statistically insignificant. And that's partially because we're a small town. So small fluctuations in data is going to skew things a lot. But I think, having that sensitivity about, why this might be something folks would ask for or would want us to explore would be, I think really good for us.
Thank you, Matt. Kathleen, is your hand up from before or is your hand
Oh.
up again? Sorry.
Sorry. I will say
Okay.
that I think that having the body cams makes sense, and utilizing that existing data. I'm like Rob. It's, introducing paper into a paperless world, I don't think is the right way. But I also am thinking about as we talk about communicating with, different pieces of this into the community through the summits. And whether it's the News of Orange or whether it's at church groups or however we end up deciding or choosing ways to reach out to the community, I don't think there can be too much education on what individual rights are and what you have the right to do. And I also think that part of it too, we've talked about it in other parts of governing and governance and what it is to be a member of the community. It's not all one-sided. We all, and we all need our parties to that. And it's hard if you don't speak the language, or it's hard when you're moving into a new community and you don't know what you don't know. But I think that if we were to have some sort of a steady diet of being able to utilize the public forum on, what are your rights, and some of these touchstone points where, there are great community concerns. Hearing that there's 8 consent searches, we have more than 8 traffic stops. So, I'm hearing it's not the 8 consent, but out of the X number of traffic stops. And even if we're educating those people, if there's 100, that's 100 people out of a town of 10,000, that's nothing. But if we are including as part of our overall communication some of these things, and not saying that we've got the right answer, and there's always going to be rooms for improvement, but I'm just thinking some of this I'm not sure that, I don't think a paper is going to be the right thing to do. Body cam to me makes sense. We've already got the evidence. And certainly if it's done badly, there are the court implications. But I think that there's some real education pieces that I'm hearing that is equally important to address the issue, because it still doesn't address, it's like there's so much we don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambling on because I'm processing out loud a little bit, and I'm trying to ascertain information which, Chief, you've graciously, you're helping me understand. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Kathleen, Chief Hampton, and then Mark, and then Madigan.
Just really quickly, I wanted to clarify something I realized I haven't really clarified. We do have a written consent to search form, a piece of paper that does exist. The way our policy is worded, it says consent should be documented for court purposes whenever possible. Officers may document the act of consent by recording their arrest, their request, and the subject's response using their body-worn cameras and/or by having the subject sign a consent to search form whenever possible. The more complete the documentation of the consent, the stronger that consent may be in court. So that's kind of the direction that we do give to officers. So I think our thing is about just making sure that we continue to have flexibility, because again, every situation is a little bit different. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Mark.
I think you may have just answered one question I had, which is what is the difference between a written consent card and is there a signature and a date on that? I have no experience being asked that question in a traffic stop, so I don't know what that is, but it seems like if there is something that's standardized that is read and recorded on the body-worn camera, that seems to be an efficient way to go about that. And if you do that, do you leave a copy of what you just read to the occupant of the vehicle without having to sign it?
Short answer is I don't know. I guess we could. They could print it off the printer in the car and give, we could create that access for them to be able to give someone a copy. As long as it's not a piece of paper that we're having to get back with signatures on it and then file and save and put in the computer system, that doesn't seem like that would add anything terrible. Most of them are little cards the officers can keep in their pocket. Because again, the other piece of this is we don't want this to become something that starts extending stops, making things longer. If we get into this long discussion about legal rights, that becomes very complicated and time consuming when you're sitting on the side of the road. So we want to try and keep it simple as well, find that balance. But that, again, we don't do it that way. That's not something we've really standardized. So I don't see a reason why it couldn't be that way. Just a matter of figuring out the logistics of it, and it would require some extra steps of the officers.
Okay, thank you.
Matt.
No, I mean, I think, Chief, what you're saying is that there is, a way that, that is kind of given affirmatively using the body camera and there's not a signature involved in that kind of thing. I think that makes sense. But I do think that it's important that folks, particularly those who might, have various language issues or might be neurodiverse or whatnot, receive information differently. We all receive different information differently. Some of us are audio, some of us are visual, and being told something and reading it, you can totally get, different meanings out of that. So I think if there was a way, where, it's kind of affirmed, via, body camera, but there is still something written, whether that's just I know our officers already carry, having watched them do it, when I did a ride along, they're already carrying a card with, their Miranda warning in it so that you make sure they're getting it correct. But if there was something similar to that, or like you said, using the printers in the car just to print something off and say, hey, if you want to keep this for your records, this is what you consented to. We have, it's been affirmed through our body camera. If anything comes of this, it's evidence in a case. But I think, just having that in a written way could really, help someone understand what exactly it is that they're consenting to. So thank you for clarifying the process.
Thank you, Matt. And I would like to piggyback on that a little bit and just say that having the written piece feels pretty important, because as I'm not sure if we'll get to this part or not, or because it's as is written elsewhere in the responses, and we've talked about in other meetings, that body camera footage is, that's another level. And so I think that that's something that we need to keep in mind, is that there's already built-in obstacles, many of them state mandated, to people who get involved with the criminal justice system, for them getting information, getting access, and so just having that paper be automatic seems like a good idea. And also, we are a small town, so this seems like something that we can try, assess, see how it's going, and reevaluate. And then the other thing just to remember is that, all of us talking about this right now have the wherewithal, whether it's financial resources or education or whatever it is. If we were to get ourselves in a situation, we could all, we would all get ourselves a good lawyer and they would really help us navigate the system. And a lot of people who get justice involved don't have those same resources. And so being sure that people really know the impacts and meaning of what they're agreeing to, it feels like something that we can offer. Oh, Matt, is your hand up again? Okay. Okay, other questions or comments about this? All right, so we did skip around a lot. So we skipped all the way to number 4 in talking about the written consent. Sorry, I'm trying to find that page here with me. And so at some future date, Chief Hampton, are you going to come back to us with this iterated in some other form of exactly what would be said and what the printout would be?
I think that's part of what our next steps would be. I
Yep.
think we go through all these and then kind of figure out which ones are action steps, which ones we can do,
Yeah.
what we're going to do.
Right.
Knowing that one's an area of further focus is what we need to then figure out how to move forward on it.
Great. Good discussion, everyone, and thanks for everyone's patience. But this seems like one where there is some general board support for finding a way to implement that recommendation. So if we could back up a little bit to, which I think 2 and 3 kind of come closely together. So we started talking about, pulling over, limiting investigations once people have been pulled over, and then the other one, number 3, which is to cease these low-level regulatory traffic stops, such as equipment violations and expired tags and plates. And Chief, you did have a chance to respond to number 2. Could you just give a bit of your perspective for the number 3?
Sure. This one is also one that we're going to struggle with. you know, we don't believe, and I don't believe that we have the luxury to decide at the local level that we're not going to enforce certain laws. That creates a lot of complications for us in terms of our oath, in terms of what we're doing. I understand the intent of it, and we've already started making some changes and making sure that we're focusing on the right things and less focus on other things. Because I agree 100%. We should have more focus on moving violations than non-moving violations. And that's how I look at them, as moving and non-moving. People talk about regulatory and non-regulatory. You know, it creates a lot of problem when we start saying, okay, we're going to enforce for this, we're not going to enforce for that. You know, we're going to stopping somebody if they have one tail light out, but what if they have two? What if they have none? You know, even Dr. Baumgartner talked about headlights. They are a safety aspect. So it really creates a lot of angst for us to be selective, deliberately selective in what we're enforcing, to say we're not going to enforce this. What I would say is, again, we've made a lot of shift to make sure we are tracking it. We're kind of looking at what we're doing, because we do want officers to spend their time focused on, you know, the moving violations. But again, if they pull up at a stoplight and pull up behind a car that the license plate's been expired for 6 months, I'd like them to address that too. And that's what we need to be focusing on, is those being more of the exception than the rule. And I think when we first started looking at this, we were looking at our officers, we're doing about 60% non-moving and about 40% moving. And it was great that we got to look at that, because we'd never really looked at it that way. And in that interim, we've shifted that over to 60 or 70% moving and about 30 to 40% non-moving. And that was just by helping folks realize, let's focus on these moving violations. Part of the reason that officers rely on the non-moving violations, in some ways they're easy and they're clean. You know, it's a very binary choice. Your tag is expired or it's not. Your light is out or it's not. You can't really open a door for argument like you do with a lot of moving violations. Oh, I wasn't speeding. Oh, I came to a complete stop. You know, it's easy for officers to make those stops sometimes. And we've kind of started to move to making sure we are focused on the traffic issues that we have, the things that are going to generate accidents. But at the same time, we feel like we do have a responsibility to kind of uphold those other laws as well. So that's kind of our perspective on this one. You know, I think we're doing things in a good balance. We're keeping an eye on what we're doing. We're monitoring what we're doing. And I think it's also important that there are places that have dealt with this through legislative. And if the legislature changes the rules, we follow that rule, no matter what it is. I have no problem with that. And we do have some models out there. You know, Virginia has made some changes. I think Philadelphia made changes. And I think, behoove us before we leap to watch and let's see what happens, what the result is. I think there's already some legal challenges going on in one of the places, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but it's, you know, I think we've got some models to help us see, is this going to be a different way, a better way? Does a legislature in our state need to make some sort of a change that we would follow? So that's kind of our perspective on it.
Thank you. Matt.
Thanks for that, Chief. I have a question. I guess maybe this is a dumb question, but I hadn't thought of it. So if, you know, I think a lot of people think of taillights being out. Obviously, an officer is, you know, on the road, you're behind the car, the taillights are out, that's regulatory stop. Clearly something's not right. But what about on the flip side? Are headlights being off? Maybe person didn't flip them on versus, you know, the lights are actually out. Is that a moving violation? Is that a regulatory stop? I mean, you know, I hadn't thought of it until I just thought of, you know, taillights being one thing, but headlights, you know, does that person know where they're going? And, you know, maybe it's not a ticket, but if we ended regulatory stops, you know, altogether, would that preclude one of our officers from saying, hey, I don't know if you know, but, you know, your headlights are off?
And that's where somewhat this becomes challenging, because, and I think they had to deal with this in Virginia. They made the law and then they had to make a change for the law that says, well, if they have no headlights, then it's okay. And theirs was very limited thing, so they kind of picked and chose. It comes down to when the officers fill out the traffic stop report, which is what all of this data is based on. They have a choice of like 6 or 8 violations, regulatory, equipment, and this would be what we call an equipment violation. I consider these non-moving violations. I mean, technically driving without your headlights at night the car is moving, but it's not the kind of safety violation we typically associate with it. So again, the language varies. I think Baumgartner talked about safety and regulatory, or he used different terms than the ones that we use typically to classify them. And that becomes a trick. It's kind of like, when's it okay? When's it not okay? And again, I think getting into that level where we're trying to decipher and cut up state laws to fit certain things becomes a real challenge.
Rob.
So Chief, there's I think a connected, related question, but it's not specific to automobile stuff. So as we see more bicycles in town and stuff, are we applying the same thing to bikes? So if they don't have a bike light at night, are we pulling them over? If they run a stop sign on a bike, are we pulling them over or addressing that with them? Or are we doing anything, I guess, with bicycles at this point?
Honestly, I don't know what the law is related to lighting on bicycles off the top of my head. I'd have to go look. Technically bicycles, I think, can be cited for blowing a stop sign. I couldn't tell you if anybody's actually stopped one. I mean, I'll be honest, we don't have anywhere near a ton of bicycles in town. I see some, but it's not anywhere near the volume of cars that we see. So I don't know. It's one of those. I don't have an example of somebody making that sort of enforcement. I know we've potentially stopped, potential DWIs on a bicycle before, but mainly so they don't kill themselves in traffic. And like I said, we could do it. I don't know if anybody has done it. I just don't know.
That's fine. It's just food for thought. So I've been pulled over for both, not having a light, riding, not here. This was in Oregon, where there's a whole lot more bikers in this community. And then also for slow rolling through a stop sign. Now, I wasn't given a citation in either of those situations. Those, they just want to let me know that I did do something that was a violation, and that the next time, might not be so lucky. But I'm just curious, and I hope, there is a day where we are seeing more bikers on the road. And so I'm just curious, in the future, if you have that, what that'd be. Thank you.
All right, Matt, is your hand really up or not? And then Kathleen, you had yours up and took it down. And Mark seems to really have his up. Did you change your mind, Kathleen?
Well, Rob actually asked partially what I was going to ask about the bikes, because my understanding was that bikes were supposed to be treated the same as vehicles in North Carolina, but I didn't know what our experience was. And I mean, I still consider our roads kind of scary to be on a bike anyway. So anyhow, that's all. I was just, Rob was asking in the direction I was kind of thinking.
All right, thanks.
There is an RWI in Oregon too.
Right, and North Carolina state law, bicycles are classified as vehicles, but there are some particular statutes that may or may not apply. So it's a little bit complicated. But again, generally they're supposed to follow the same rules of the road as everyone else. I think generally a lot more discretion is given to them because, again, their mode of transportation is just different. So I think officers usually have a lot more discretion unless they're doing something really unsafe.
All right, thank you. Mark.
I just want to say, Chief, that the description you have for number 3 here makes sense to me, and I support your conclusions there. .
Chief, I wanted to reflect back what I heard you say at the beginning of this and see if it's an accurate reflection, if I'm understanding what you said. Part of what I believe that I am gathering from you is that when it was brought up that you all, look at what your balance was between types of stops, that you looked at that and realized, oh, maybe we are putting too much emphasis on these, I'm trying to be sure I'm calling them at least what we're calling them in here, on the tail lights and the expired
Non-moving.
text, non-moving. Thank you.
Non-moving, yes.
And maybe we need to focus on things that are an actual safety issue, the moving violations. And so you've looked at that and now you have now your proportion is less on the non-moving violations. Is that correct?
Yes, I think the way I look at it is we realized we weren't putting enough emphasis on the moving. And we pushed to put more emphasis on the moving violation. We had officers who, were watching for particular violations or, would run tags and find issues with cars. And we're like, that's not really what we want. We wanted folks out watching for violations that are the kind of violations we get a lot of complaints from our citizens on: stop signs, speeding, the kind of things that result in potentially accidents. Some of the vehicle equipment stuff falls into that category, whether it's lighting issues, tire issues. So it is a little bit nuanced there. But we realized not enough of the officer's time and focus, in our opinion, was being spent on the moving stuff. That we were going after the easy stuff, and we wanted to go after more of the things that take a little bit more focus and effort. So that's why we started pushing to focus more on moving violations. And that's what we've done.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. And then related to that, is it accurate to say that this issue is, I'm not sure if this is too much of a stretch or not, but it sounds like you're also saying that the real solution to this, to get at what the task force is asking here, is there needs to be a legislative solution. That's kind of where the cut and dry authority needs to be, or is, about the laws that HPD is obligated to enforce. But within that, sort of like with marijuana possession, there is discretion within the department about what you're placing emphasis on. So that there's a line you're walking about not saying, no, we're not enforcing this anymore. That's where things get tricky with what you are sworn to do, but you can emphasize or de-emphasize different things. Is that an accurate summation of what's happening with?
Yeah, to some extent. Discretion is always going to play a role into it, and every agency's priorities are going to shift. They're going to change. The things that we're going to put focus on are going to vary some. It is complicated because we have state laws that are passed by the state that local entities may view different ways. And it becomes a real challenge for us to say as a local entity, oh, we're just not going to do this state thing. And to me, that's not really our place in government. It has to kind of work the other way around, So yes, we do put emphasis and prioritize things. We do agree. We need to make sure we're focusing on the moving violations. Those are important things. That's where more time should be. But as we encounter the other things, we don't want to ignore them either. So I'm not sure how I may or may not have answered that, but it is discretionary focus. We could put tons of focus on expired tags, and that be our mission for 6 months. But that's not what we believe our purpose is. We can't ignore it. We got to address it. We use a lot of discretion when we do address it. But it allows us to make sure our focus is in the right place. And again, by realizing our officer, we weren't putting as much emphasis on the moving violations, we may not have been addressing some of the complaints our community has. We're not getting a lot of calls from somebody who's complaining about a car with expired tags driving down their street. They're complaining about speeding. They're complaining about stop signs. So we're trying to address the totality of things, but making sure that our primary focus is on the stuff that, is the stuff of real interest. We don't want to say we're going to ignore it because we're not going to ignore it. There's times and situations we're going to stop them. You know, the officers drive all day. The chances of not getting in behind somebody who's got a tag expired, who's not wearing a seatbelt, who's, you know, got a light out, you know, that's going to happen. And again, we also realize sometimes, like we talked about before with the other item, sometimes these are opportunities to address something the officer feels strongly they need to deal with.
All right, thank you. All right, so I just want to do a time and energy check, which is that it's 9:20 and we still have a lot of things to go through. My suggestion is going to be that we try to wrap up this particular thing we're talking about now and go through the next two items in the traffic stop category, and then call that part of our discussion it for tonight, and move the next item, figure out how to do the next items in future meetings. Does that sound okay to people with energy levels? Okay, all right, great. So Matt and then Kathleen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Chief, you made some good points about really the complexity of some of these things. You know, if you know someone has a broken taillight, for example, you know, that's a regulatory stop. We don't do regulatory stops, and you're like, oh well, you know, when they go get their car inspected next, you know, it'll come up in a car inspection. Well, what if the tag's expired? So like, it's compounded in that sense that, well, that's not going to be caught at their next inspection, because now license plate renewals, you know, go hand in hand with, you know, those safety inspections that happen every year. So I can certainly see where, you know, it is hard to possibly, you know, look the other way when there are other things that may, you know, be at play. If, you know, again, is the license tag expired or not? If it is, then, you know, maybe some things wouldn't get caught if that's the case. So I can see definitely how it's hard to separate out those issues for sure.
Thank you. And I would also say, you know, again, we're going to be watching what's happening in these places that have done something like this. And, you know, this may be something we do have to come back and revisit. They may find a better way. But, you know, again, this is a very challenging thing to make a change and then change back. Let's use those models to, in my mind, to let us, you know, one, internally, let us continue to work on this and get us in the direction that we understand folks want to go. But at the same time, you know, let us keep watching what's happening, because it's very new in the places that have done it. And there may be a lot of unintended consequences that we do not want to have happen here.
Thank you, Chief. Kathleen?
Yeah, I like hearing that we are shifting emphasis while at the same time ensuring that officers do have a tool. And I just think of, you know, in town, it's one thing, our interstates are another thing. And I just like I really am appreciative that we're not emphasizing and we're focusing on education, because I feel that's another way where interaction with law enforcement can be positive, where there is education and there's communication that's going on between officer and resident, where, and you know, it's officers are helping, and HPD I think does a really good job of helping our residents, but it's just another type of interaction without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think I like that we would be keeping the tool, because I think it's a needed tool at times. And if we misuse a hammer, I don't think we throw out the hammer. We do use it differently. And I think that's a case here. That's my thinking, at least.
And thank you, Kathleen. And I do want to make a note that there are one, two, three, there's, a list of 5 action items that the HPD that Dwayne has listed here that they can move forward on, so that's moving in the direction of the intent of what that recommendation is, without necessarily being able to do a full ceasing of those kinds of stops. And I think it's a great point that we have an opportunity to learn from other communities, especially some of the bigger ones, states and bigger cities that have, more resources to throw at doing, doing these new regulatory approaches that it might behoove us to learn from that and not necessarily create the wheel ourselves. Okay. Item number 5. Sorry, I don't want to move. Are we ready to move forward? Okay. Item number 5, reallocate funding to develop resources to assist people who meet certain income eligibility criteria with fixing minor vehicle maintenance issues, as well as assistance with registration, insurance renewal. Also recommend that Hillsborough begin contributing support to the Orange County Criminal Justice Debt Fund and expand this fund to include assistance for costs related to vehicle maintenance and registration insurance renewal.
Sorry. So this recommendation kind of blended a couple of things together. So one thing to clarify a little bit, the Orange County Criminal Justice Debt Fund is something that's run out of Chapel Hill Police Department. Chapel Hill started it. Carrboro has joined in with it, and the Orange County Bail Bond Project, I think they had money savings from other things, so they've also done it. And the idea is it helps residents of those jurisdictions. They track the pools of money. So, what Carrboro puts in goes to Carrboro folks. What Chapel Hill puts in goes to Chapel Hill. Bail Bond Project goes to county folks. And I'm hopefully explaining this completely, because it took us a little while to kind of figure out how this was and what it works. But it goes to helping folks pay court cost related stuff. It has nothing to do with paying for equipment repairs or registration. It does not do that in any way, shape, or form. Short thing is, for us, sure, we're happy. If you guys want to contribute to that, go for it. I think it's great. I've already talked to Chapel Hill. They'd be willing and okay with us joining on. But at some point down the road, if all the agencies do join in, it could become a bigger burden than they can manage, and that may change some costs. I did a little bit of research for money, and that's in here. Carrboro puts in about $7,500, Bail Bond Project put in about $6,000, and Chapel Hill puts in about $20,000. I don't know about Carrboro and bail bond money. I think Chapel Hill said they pretty much exhaust theirs. I'm not exactly sure how the word gets out to folks and how folks know to use this resource. So that's something we would have to work out. The other piece of this is about, us providing funding in some way to fix vehicle maintenance, registration, insurance renewal. Over the last, several years ago, we actually looked into an equipment idea. We were talking about using Hillsborough Rocks, partnering with the auto parts places, figuring out some sort of voucher, stop people for lights out, give them the voucher, they go to the auto parts place, they get a light. We ran into the complication that none of our auto parts places really can do the installation. And a lot of the places we found, there are other places that have programs like this, but they partner with like a Jiffy Lube or, some kind of quick repair place to get the repairs done. So, we couldn't find a way to really make it work with what we have in our town. Our town's not that big. So that became the challenge. That's one that if you guys are passionate that we need a program like that, we can go back and revisit that, maybe talk to some of our garages, try and find a way around it. I don't know the implications of us using like town funds to pay for people's insurance and their registration. I'm not really sure how that works. That's an area I haven't delved far enough into yet. I don't know if there's a complication with that. It may be something we could set up a donation process or something, but again, we're adding a lot of process and structure if we start going there that we don't really have anybody to do. So it's just kind of food for thought. I could see us setting up maybe an equipment repair day where we give out vouchers over a period of time and folks come on a Saturday and we partner with an auto parts place and maybe try to figure out how to install stuff. We're going to be probably accepting a little liability if we do that, if we have to do it. But, Kevin, close your ears here. I'm not terribly afraid of the liability there. We have plenty of folks who are auto savvy who can help people put in light bulbs. So I think we'd be okay with that. But I guess before we go back and try to, the way we wanted to do it wouldn't work. The other way we thought of wouldn't really work. So we can kind of try to come up with a plan B if you guys are supportive of funding existing to do that. So long-winded.
Great, appreciate that. Kathleen, and then Matt, and then Mark, and then Rob.
I am of multiple minds. On one hand, I really like the idea of being able to help people because transportation is so critical. You can't have employment. You can't get to school without transportation and all of that. At the same time, I go back to, we don't have funding for housing, which is even more fundamental. We don't have funding for things where, it's like I'm grappling partially with prioritization, because I think it's a wonderful idea. But would I fund this over getting someone in housing, which is I feel like in some ways we're having to make choices. I'm really struggling with that. The other piece is, how do we, and this is, if we were to be able to have funding that we could address in our ideal world, all of the issues, do we have income level limits, and would it be means tested, or would it be first come, first serve? And I can see some administrative pieces and, capacity issues of how do we administer, how do we support, how do we do so equitably, how do we do so fairly? Because I can still see it ends up with those who have the most means or who are plugged in the most will benefit most, and those who need it most don't know about it, don't avail, or funds run out before they do. So it's one of those that I think is intriguing and attractive on one level and problematic on multiple levels. So I'm
If I
kind of
could jump-
curious what other people's thoughts and what your thoughts are and what other people's thoughts are. And that insurance, I think that if you, on the payment of the insurance, because insurance is a whole different legal instrument, that could get really problematic. But our legal eagles, Kevin, better than we do.
And just to jump in real quick before you respond, Dwayne, Kathleen, for clarification, are you talking about to a possible repair assistance program and the bail assistance fund, or
Correct.
Okay.
Oh,
I'll just jump in and say, I think I need to go back and double check. So don't hold me to this forever. But I think the criminal justice debt fund, I think there's some income stuff attached with that. Anything we did, to be honest, I think if we try to attach income in any way, it will overly complicate things. The end result is if we were able to do something, we may be helping some people that really don't need any help, but hopefully we'll still be helping a few people that do need help. And that was kind of the perspective we looked at.
Oh, thank you. Matt.
Yeah, Chief, do you have any clarity on the fund that they're recommending, or maybe the mayor, about helping people with registration issues? That also means, to some extent, possibly helping someone with car taxes that they owe. So is that also envisioned in part of the registration issue, or and then if that's the case, I don't know how that all works out when government's helping someone cover a tax bill because that's what's stopping them from registering their car.
I think that's envisioned in kind of the spirit of what was recommended is help people with these things that are making them non-compliant. But to your point, the insurance and the registration, those are the pieces that I don't think there's a way to do that. Equipment, we may be able to work something out. Court fees, we have that resource through the bail relief fund, but actually helping people by paying their taxes or paying their insurance or paying their registration fees, I don't know a way we can do that. That's going to require a lot more digging.
Thank you. Great question. Mark.
The questions that that I have are really in line with what has been discussed just now. So I guess a question for Kevin would be, are local governments prohibited from funding tax relief in other areas such as DMV?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. And honestly, I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I can think of a number of, hurdles in the first place. The first being that, public funds have to be expended for a recognized public purpose. And so, I'm not sure off the top of my head whether there's any legal basis to recognize, tax assistance as a proper public purpose. I'm also fairly certain that, that paying a citizen's tax bill, at the very least may qualify as an exclusive emolument, which is unconstitutional on its face. So these are questions that would, I think, involve, some serious legal research before we could make any sort of recommendation one way or the other on.
Thank you. I'm definitely supportive of the concept of figuring out how we can, within the law, support people who are struggling to have a compliant motor vehicle, because as Commissioner Ferguson says, transportation is a significant problem, and I almost can recall the statistic based on the most recent census of households that don't report having access to a motor vehicle, and it was high. I was surprised how high that number was, and of course it would, for all these things we're talking about, would have to be only for town of Hillsborough residents. And I'm wondering if there are potential partnerships with third-party organizations who might have experience helping people with motor vehicles in this way. The analogy I'm thinking of is how OCIM helps with access to food, and I think they also maybe help manage part of the water and sewer donation assistance program. So I'm wondering if there could be some third-party partners that we might be able to work with to achieve the goal, and also solicit donations to that fund to help cover things that the town is prohibited by law from doing.
And Rob.
So Mark answered a few of my questions. Thank you, Mark. So I'm definitely supportive of, contributing our share to the Orange County Criminal Justice Debt Fund. I feel that that's something that our, residents would benefit from, as Chapel and Carver residents also. Dwayne, do you know how, I guess these are two separate things. So the minor vehicle equipment issue, that's not something that they're doing in Chapel Carver or anywhere in Orange County that you're aware of, right?
Yeah, correct. I don't know of anybody that's got a program like that. And to Mark's point earlier, I don't really know of any organization. That might be a gap that a nonprofit or somebody could step into, but there's not really anybody around here doing that sort of program that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of us being able to assist in that way. And I think it's really, if we can find a garage in town or a couple that are willing to provide that service at, either no cost or very low cost or something as part of this program, I think, it's something that I would definitely support. Changing light bulbs not as easy as it used to be. It depends on the vehicle. And I have a coworker who's had a light out for like 4 months. I'm like, when you get your light fixed? And he's like, I tried, and he literally had to pull off his front bumper and do some other ninja magic to make it work, and that didn't even work. And so he ended up having to take a day off of work to to take it into a shop to have it done. And all it was a halogen bulb that he needed to be replaced. So it can be challenging. At the same time, I've been able to to plug and play with a couple of my cars, but it really just depends on the vehicle and the make and the model and the year. So
it's also can be very expensive. They're not $20 light bulbs like they used to be. I had to replace one in my car. It was a $100 light bulb. I couldn't believe such a thing existed.
Right. Hopefully it'll outwear you. So I'm definitely supportive of contributing to the Orange County Justice Debt Fund, and I'd like to try to find a way that we can help other people with minor repairs. I just don't know what the answer is to that right now.
All right, in the spirit of helping us move along, could I get, oh yeah, go ahead, Dwayne.
Well, I was just going to ask on this one, could I get, I guess I'm not sure how to move or where to move on the Criminal Justice Debt Fund. I didn't sound like we had consensus to do that. It sounded like I had a couple that might have been interested. If there's a way to get a little more direction, we can start moving on that one fairly quickly if we need to.
And we are about to move into budget discussions, so that would be a time to, hear about
It's like,
what
or a
the impact
motion,
would
or
be.
do you need a motion or something like that?
I don't think we need a motion. I think we were just looking for engaging desire and
Right. If
interest.
I know I have consensus, I'll work on getting you an agenda item that you would then have to potentially make a motion on in the future.
Well, I was just going to suggest that, Chief, if you just want to roll that into y'all's budget proposal for the department, that'll probably be pretty simpler working with, Jen and Eric to get it. If it's not in your department, then another one, and just put it in as a budget request. I think that would satisfy everything than us trying to figure out where to get the money for it in this fiscal year when that one closes in 3 months.
Okie dokie.
Mark?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to say out loud that I do support that, Dwayne. And quick question, and that is, would the scope of our funds be limited to just for motor vehicle related issues, or would it potentially be used for other kinds of bail bond relief?
I think it's broad, so I don't think it's just motor vehicle. It's court related costs, and it's administered through Chapel Hill. So people apply, I guess they meet certain criteria, and they dole out funds. We're not going back and asking questions and trying to administer it. They've got a process for that with I think they may have a board or somebody that looks at it as well. I'll have to dig a little bit deeper.
Okay. I'm just pointing out that if we are approving it or in concept for this scope of use, it might have an unintended consequence and that it's used for other things. So we might not accomplish the task we're trying to accomplish without some guidelines or guardrails or some process involved. And I'm not sure if they can even do that. And then I wanted to comment that in terms of the level of funding, there's some, as you may know, and I know Eric knows, there's some formulas that we use for population that might help guide us in terms of what our contribution might be compared to Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Orange County. That's it.
And I would say, I think as I read this recommendation, I think it's in the traffic stuff, but it's potentially a little bit broader. So I don't think
I think
that
that's
it's
right.
necessarily bad that it may expand beyond traffic related fines and stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that I think that the intent is this fund exists, the other communities are participating, they're asking that Hillsborough participate as well, because of the impact that it can have on people's lives and livelihood if they aren't able to pay that. Okay, and then there is interest in knowing more, interest in knowing more about what it would take to have a different program to help people with these minor car issues. If there's ways to partner with a couple garages or something. Because I think I'll just say, I feel like there's a couple ways to get at that. One that seems simpler, even though HPD has already attempted it and it turned out not to be so simple, which is dealing with, you know, the light bulb replacements and stuff. That what gets complicated is, and seems probably like it wouldn't be doable, but is paying, you know, insurance and registration, those kinds of things. But maybe we can get a legal answer on that.
We can, Bob and I can certainly look into that and report back to you all and to Chief Hampton for kind of some guidance once we've had a chance to dig into that a little bit more.
Great, thank you. Eric.
Commissioner Ferguson mentioned a little while ago about, I'm using the word context, like, oh, if we were going to spend X number of dollars on this, I would rather spend it on this. And just from a brainstorming standpoint, the concept of replacing lights and fixing cars and doing all of that, I could see that being a lot of labor and a lot of energy to not fix very many cars. So when we're looking in the budget, which, as I say, everything sounds great, and I do this, I'm guilty of it every day, like, that's great, we have to do that. But the context of comparing it against all the other options as we get into the budget, it may be that the board would say, we rather make a contribution towards increasing the frequency of our circulator route, or getting a, you know, contributing towards expanding public transportation, versus how many more people can we impact going other ways. So I'm not saying to not do that, but I would think that we would also want to look at other options.
Yes.
Great point. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Kathleen.
If I could, just as a follow-up to that, you know, I would suggest this item, maybe we consider putting this kind of in a parking lot till the discussion's over, because while we're willing to explore this, I have no misconception that anything we develop will be a lot of work. And if folks are just kind of lukewarm about it, it may not be, again, we're not probably going to really move a needle with a program like this. It'll feel good, we'll be doing something, but I don't know that we'll be able to do enough of it to have a big impact. And again, a lot of the people we stop aren't even Hillsborough people that this would not even necessarily apply to. So I would suggest, I'll put this one down as something for us to kind of revisit as we get back toward next steps. Would that be okay with everybody? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last one for this meeting anyway is number 6 is a request to cease regulatory checkpoints. And this is something that was discussed and if I believe that isn't done a whole lot anymore anyway, but I will let Chief address that.
Right. This one for us is a lot like the consent searches issue. It's a tool that's used very sparingly. You know, it's important to understand too that to the point that Commissioner Hughes made earlier, I think that there are a lot of other organizations that have jurisdiction here. So sometimes they're the ones doing these things, and you know, we sometimes assist, we sometimes don't. You know, I think it's a tool that we don't abuse, we don't use excessively. You know, my preference, you know, my belief is this should remain as a tool available to us and continue to use it, you know, in the sparing ways that we have. because it is an effective tool. Unlicensed drivers are a problem. A lot of other things come from these license checks, but we get a lot of the unlicensed drivers, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed. We are looking at some things. One of the things we're exploring, typically as an agency, we don't do a lot of DWI checkpoints because there's more complication that comes with them, but we are exploring some ways that we may be able to do them in a simpler fashion. And if we can, you may see us move away from straight regulatory checkpoints altogether. A lot of times these regulatory checkpoints are done at times in places where there's a higher probability of us getting drunk drivers, because we haven't been able to do the big DWI checkpoints. So again, there's a lot that goes with this. There's a lot of things, a lot of positives that come out of these. There's some negatives that come out of these. If we were using them all the time, I think it would create a real problem. I think it would create a bad community interaction. But I think using them in very sparing ways and very limited ways, sometimes there's an appropriate time to do them, to try to kind of impact some things. So, my hope is that they remain a tool, they remain available for us, but we are exploring options that get to more of what we really want to do, which is getting a lot of the drunks off the street.
Yeah.
Questions and comments on this item? Rob and then Kathleen.
So I've got mixed feelings on this. So my sister came and visited us several years ago, and we went through one of these driver's like checkpoints, and she was she couldn't understand how they could stop everybody and and pull them over for no reason, blah blah blah. And I said, I don't know, it's the law here. Maybe it's not in Oregon, or they don't do it in Oregon, but they do it here. But and then I think it was probably the most recently one Hillsborough participated in 2 or 3 months ago. My daughter came over for dinner and then left, and then called me on the way home saying that she got stopped at this checkpoint and what was that all about and blah blah blah. And so I rode my bike down and I watched as I think it was State Highway Patrol, Hillsborough Police Department, maybe Orange County Sheriff, all right in front of my neighborhood in Lafayette and Cates Creek Parkway and Old 86. And I sat out there on my bike for a good hour or more, just kind of watching and observing and seeing everything that was happening. And every single car that was, going either north or south, they stopped. And it did take a fair amount of officers, because you got, once one car stops and, the next one, and the cars don't stop going north and south. They keep coming. And for the most part, they did license check, and then, they send the person on their way. But then there's definitely some outliers that they pull them over and say, go over here, and they follow up and blah, blah, blah. One, I don't know. It's just a personal thing. I think of where I live, and I felt, this is, right in front of my neighborhood. And, but I've seen them further up on Old 86 outside of town limits, doing the same thing. I don't remember if HPD was a part of that one or not. And then talking to an officer that was there that night afterwards. Well, actually, no, it was that same time. So they pulled somebody over, and then they ended up sending that guy away. And I just asked him what happened there, and he said, well, the guy didn't have a license. So and so the only time that, how I explained it to him, is the only time that they would check, is if the person didn't have a license, because the driver's license check. So he didn't have a license, but he did have outstanding warrants for his arrest. And so they arrested him, for that. But if he had a license, they wouldn't have checked, for those outstanding warrants. And so it did take a bad person off the streets that night. But I know a lot of people feel that it's unnecessary. I do think, as you mentioned, Chief, that there's definitely, good outcomes that come out of it. And then there's, probably some more negative things of just stopping people in traffic and them feeling like there was no reason for it. So I'm kind of on the fence, really. I know that there's a purpose for it. I like how we don't do them very often. So if it's if it's something that we're not doing very often, I'm okay with, but it's not something that I really am supportive of doing regularly, or more than we're doing it than we are now, I guess. That's it.
Thank you, Rob. And then Kathleen.
Similarly, I'm on the fence because I've gotten a lot of complaints. I've gotten a lot of it from our Fairview residents, and particularly, our Hispanic community. And at the same time, I recognize the challenge that we're under, and it goes back to state law, which is crappy. But we're dealing with, and I've seen, sort of like, Rob, where I've been stopped, and I've also observed and seen, on one hand, I think doing it often, it's an inconvenience. It makes people feel they're guilty in proving innocence. At the same time, I do think it is a very useful tool. And we do get folks with outstanding warrants, with guns, with contraband and such, that needs to come off, and we're on the corridor. So I think if we were going to err, I would like to still keep the tool, but use it very sparingly. And if there's a specific purpose, and I think it is useful if you're trying to find something specific or someone specific, or if it's trafficking or something like that. But the bottom line, it's a sparing use, and not the tool that we go to, or the first, second, or even third tool out of the toolbox.
Matt?
Sorry, having issues with using my mouse this evening. No, I agree. I think there's a time I remember in the 90s, especially I think as at least my recollection, it seemed like, folks wanted to do a culture change in terms of really encouraging people to wear their seatbelts and, these sort of stops, roadblocks, really. I remember a lot of them on, Mountain Road, making sure people were wearing their seatbelts, that, kids were strapped in, especially, et cetera, et cetera. So I understand the public safety component to it. And then also, the DUI checkpoints, but kind of similar to what Rob described. I was going home one day, and I live in Waterstone, was getting ready to turn on the Cates Creek, and I see a bunch of blue lights up ahead. And I was like, wow, what's going on at, 10:30 on a Sunday night? And it was a DUI checkpoint. Now, that was not a problem for me. There was no issue, what I had been doing that night and et cetera. But, officer said, license and registration. And another officer, I guess this guy had been new, another officer said, oh, he's fine, and just kind of waved me through the checkpoint. And that didn't make me feel good. So I think also kind of making sure that, when we are doing these sorts of things, that, whether it's myself or the mayor or any other commissioner or the chief or whoever, that, even if our folks think we're good, responsible people, we should also be, checked just like everyone else as well, because that does, I think I was the only person at that checkpoint at that time, but, what if my neighbor saw, oh, well, wait, he's a town commissioner and he got waved through, and I didn't get to go do that. I had to, sit there with my registration. They check everything and et cetera. So, I think that, we make sure that everyone's getting the same treatment. I think it's really important if and when we do these things. and in deciding which ones that we continue and which ones we don't.
Thank you, Matt. Mark?
Agree a lot with the comments that have been made, and want to ask Chief, in the case of a general regulatory checkpoint, I'm curious to know, from law enforcement's perspective, is the intent to keep unsafe vehicles off the road or unlicensed drivers off the road? What is it to, what is the primary purpose of a regulatory checkpoint? And then I have a comment about DUI checkpoint, but I'll let Dwayne respond to that first.
All right. Just to be clear, and this also goes to something Commissioner Hughes said, is there are different kinds of checkpoints. North Carolina law allows checkpoints for Chapter 20 violations, which are traffic violations. Generally, we only participate in, well, there's a third kind, but we participate in two primary kinds. One is a driver's license checking station. So when we're running a driver's license checking station, we're checking for a valid driver's license registration. That's it. Much like Commissioner English said, if they pull up, they hand you a driver's license, you glance at the tags, they're good, off they go, they're on their way. There's no more conversation unless something immediate and crazy happens. In that little bit of time that you see a crime, there's no stopping them, there's no nothing, they're on their way. The only time they get pulled out is, like he said, when they don't have that. So I mean, the purpose is to check for properly licensed drivers. The DWI checking station's purpose is to check for folks violating the DWI provisions. Those are the two main things that we do, the two main things that I know of anybody doing. And again, we haven't really been doing DWI because license check is just easier to do in most cases. There is an informational checkpoint. And again, that's a little bit different animal, where you may run a checkpoint to either solicit information or to share information. We're looking for a particular crime that's happened a particular time of day, and we're checking drivers that drive through that time of day to see if anybody might have seen anything. So that's a little bit different animal. This recommendation, in my mind, is focused solely on the driver's license checking stations. It's not talking about DWI checking stations or informational checking stations. And that was my interpretation of this, because they are different animals.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll just say that I've had a family member killed by a DUI driver, and so I'm in support of not ceasing DUI checkpoints. I think they're essential to public safety and where appropriate.
Dwayne, could you say a little bit about what I get the reasons for a regulatory checkpoint, the driver's license check, but what are the times when you would say we really need to do one of these now, like as far as keeping it in the toolbox? Or there are times when it's really appropriate? Like what are those times when you feel like you really need to have that option?
Sometimes law enforcement agencies will use these if you've got a particular neighborhood that's maybe had, some crime issues, some victimization issues, to be able to show a lot more presence. I mean, they draw a lot of attention. You guys, some of you experience that when they happen. It brings a lot of police presence into a neighborhood. Now that can be good and bad. If it's a neighborhood that's victimized a lot and we bring a lot more police presence, negative things can come with that as well. We try to do them with a very random focus. Again, we don't do them very often. We try to kind of move them around. We make sure we're not targeting the same neighborhoods or even the same driving paths. We also try to be careful to avoid things. We try to avoid times when there's a lot of traffic, because just practically you'll get overwhelmed. We try to avoid things like, school pickup times and things like that, because again, that creates a lot of problems for folks as well. So, it's generally a tool. If we're seeing a lot of driving while license revoked or driving without a license stops, those can be problems. But generally speaking, it's generally driven, kind of like our alert compliance operations. We try to just do a couple of them every so often, just to keep that in the box for folks. So I can't tell you there's necessarily a specific targeted times like, ooh, we need to do a license check. Each situation can be a little bit unique because again, they can come with the unintended consequences, even when we're trying to do the right thing.
Thank you. What I'm hearing from board members is that they are interested in you being allowed to keep this as an option, but also appreciate the attitude of it being used rarely and sparingly. Is that accurate assessment?
And I'll add to that, I think this is also something we work into the quarterly reports as kind of a transparency thing. That way folks are very aware of what we're doing.
Right. Thank you. And when you put that in the quarterly reports, do you also say where you do that? Because I think that's something that is meaningful to people because they want to know, is it happening in the same neighborhood over and over? You know, that's
right. The where and the results, it's kind of what we're trying to figure out. How do you report out kind of where it happens, what the results were? That way folks can kind of see, you know, where we did it and what came from it.
Thank you. So we have been through, even though we have a lot more to go, we've done a lot tonight. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for all your great questions and comments and thoughts that you've put in to these two sections we've covered, the mental health section and the traffic stops section. And I just want to make note that there are places in here where there's really movement to be made on these recommendations made by the task force. And so I think that that's great that there's these places of alignment and congruency. They might not look exactly like it's worded in the recommendations, but I do think that there are action items that reflect the spirit of what is desired. And in some places they're clear, let's move on this. So I think that the next step for now will be to just figure out with town staff of when the next time is we can do another portion of our discussion. Does that make sense to you also, Eric?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll make sense of that offline. And I will also, I don't know if everybody on the task force was able to watch this, but I'll try to do at least a brief recap to them of our discussion points tonight. And anything else to add for now? All right. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes. And now we are moving on to item number, and also Eric, maybe this is already happening, but I know there were some staff members that were on call in case they needed to chime in on any task force issues. So maybe we can let any of those people go if they're able to go.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on to item 4B, discussion of email signatures and individual web pages for mayors and commissioners. Now, the last time we talked about this topic, team, we talked for an hour and a half about our email signature. So I'm going to give a strong plug for us to be as succinct as possible and make some decisions we can all live with.
Can I just say, I really liked being the guinea pig for some of this. And while I really like seeing what it looks like, poor computer abilities is pulled out their hair over my phone. It is so locked down because of work, my day job. God bless them. We haven't solved that issue yet. Just to let you know, it is still a work in progress and apparently maybe until the day I die. Well, it continues.
Good times. Days of our cell phone lives. Oh, Catherine, welcome. So I was thinking, Catherine, I would turn this over to you, or do you want me to? Okay, all right.
Either way, I'm fine. I wasn't going to show a presentation, just basically get your feedback and find out if you have any questions, I can answer them.
That's great. So you want to start, sorry, I have to lean down here and get my iPad that's been charging so I can look at that part of my agenda.
So if we could start with the email signatures, that would be great. So I think there are 6 options. And what we're recommending are options 1, 2, or 3. And those are the most succinct ones, which follow most closely the best practices for keeping email signatures short. The first one is the one that was given to you with the town employees. The second one has a link to an individual board page. And the third one includes the committee assignments as well as the link to the individual board page. So those are the 3 that we see as the best options, but there are also options that allow committee personal areas of focus to be included. And I'm sorry, I misspoke, there are 5 options.
Matt.
I like option 3. It looks succinct, and I think it's really good. And then if folks want to know more about what we do, or our little biography or whatever, then I think they could just take a look at our personal page on the website.
All right, we've got to vote for option 3. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, that's great. I'm going to be quiet, Catherine. I'll let you field.
Okay, thanks. Mark.
I like option 2 as my first choice and option 3 is my second choice. And I have a question, and that is, there's a line break between the line that begins email correspondences to and from this address, and then the next line that says, see my committee assignments. Could those not be contracted into one sentence or one paragraph to economize? Or is it important that that correspondence disclaimer be on its own line?
I was feeling like it was important that the disclaimer is on its own line. I just think the committee assignments will get lost if it's part of the paragraph. But I think it's I can see what you're saying about maybe we could close the gap a little bit more. So I dummied these up in PowerPoint, so it wasn't using the actual template. So there probably could be less space between the lines.
Yeah, I guess I'm going for economy. That's why I chose number 2, because it lists all the additional information, via the hyperlink. So that's my reason.
Thank you. Kathleen?
I do like 3. It's still shorter. Well, actually, all of these are shorter than my day job signature that we're required to use. So I'm like, no, in my industry, and I have to say I'm guilty of living in that world. But I do like 3. And just to clarify, like I said, computer abilities is still tearing out their hair with my phone. Not for a lack of trying on everyone's part.
I'm sorry to hear that. Matt. Commissioner Hughes, I'm sorry for calling you off my first name.
Oh, you can call me Matt. No, I should have put my hand down. I'm good.
Commissioner English.
Oh, come on, you can call me by my first name too. I like 2, but I can live with 3. I'm kind of with Mark, where I think less is more in the signature, at least for me. So, and I've seen that email correspondence, blah, blah, blah thing at the very end. Does it I don't know if how that looks or whatever, but where I'm used to seeing is kind of like the last thing. And so the everything within the signature stays kind of all together. And then it's that last little disclaimer for legal reasons. That's the only feedback I would have.
Sounds fine to flip them. I don't think there's a reason to not do it. Commissioner Lloyd, do you have a preference?
Evelyn, you don't have me?
Yes. Do you have a preference on the email signatures?
Well, probably option 2.
All right, so that is 3 with a preference for option 2. Is it okay to go with that?
Well, I mean that I don't have an office phone because I have enough trouble with the pharmacy phone. And people, and I'm not going to give a mobile phone out.
So the vote seems to be, or the preference seems to be for option 2 for everybody. For most people, there's 3.
It's actually 3 and 3 because of how we split it. But I can, it's one of those, I'm just past to the point of caring. Mainly because, so it's like, whatever.
So I think option 2 was the first choice for 3 people. And option 3 is the first choice for 2. So if you guys want to discuss it further, or if you're okay with going with option 2, that's where we can go with the disclaimer flipped.
Jen, did you offer an opinion? And this affects you as well.
I had intended to only say anything if I was needed for a tie-breaking vote. But if I was forced to choose, my first choice would be 2 as well, just in the name of succinctness. And the information is still available through the hyperlink.
All right, well, if it's okay, then I'll plan on option 2 with the disclaimer at the bottom. So the next thing would be deciding on the board pages, whether any of them suit you guys and what your preferences are. So
I would like to ask Ms. Jane Doe to join our group. She sounds like a great woman. Sorry, I'll be quiet again.
So Jonathan pulled that from, I think, Wiki Commons, and she is a newscaster, I believe, in Brazil. So the recommendations for the board pages are options 2 and 4. And these are the ones in which the personal interests are and the activities are listed separately in bullet points. Option 2 is in third person, and option 4 is in first person.
I mean, I'm still getting a little bit blind, but I like bullets and third person.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I like option 2, having it in the third person works for me. It includes the personal areas of focus. So, if there's other community stuff, my list will probably not nearly be as long as Kathleen's, but but I think that gives us a lot of kind of melts all the things that we want to put together. And I don't know, I feel weird about writing things in the first person that I'm not personally delivering, I guess. So I like the third person a lot.
Yeah. You're on mute, Catherine.
Sorry, Commissioner Bell.
Oh, you wrote
Um,
it.
Totally agree that the third person sounds a lot better. It'll also be easier to edit. Instead of having 5 different voices, the editor can have one voice. So I think it'll be more cohesive that way. But I like number 1. I immediately had questions about what counts as a community thing. Should I only write about things that are current? What about things that are in the past? How many bullets can I have? So I immediately kind of went down a rabbit hole and I said, just that may not be as important to include. So I'm going to choose option number 1 that doesn't list all the other community-minded things.
And I think we were looking at it as it would be current activities. But that is up for discussion with you all. Commissioner English?
I like third person, and I don't really have a preference for whether it's included in the paragraph or bullet, so I'm gonna not voice my opinion on that part.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes?
I swear, I actually lowered my hand this time. And it did not go down.
That's fine. Commissioner Bell? All right. Commissioner Lloyd, do you have a preference?
I don't at the moment. I'll have to let you know.
Okay. Mayor Weaver?
I like option 2.
Okay. I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, are you talking about options or what are you asking?
We're talking about the board pages, the individual board pages, and whether there is one option that you like more than the other. So options 1 and 2 are written in the third person. Options
Third
3 and
person would be what? Hers?
that would be where it would say something like Commissioner Evelyn Lloyd lives in Hillsborough, and versus your writing about yourself where you say I live in Hillsborough.
Oh, the biography.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I thought you were talking about something else. Okay.
So the question is, would you prefer it to be written in third person or first person? And would you prefer for the areas of personal focus to be wrapped up into the biography or to be listed separately as bulleted items?
I still don't get, I don't particularly feel well and I cannot concentrate. I'm past concentration. I'll have to get back with you.
That's fine. I'm trying to see what. So Commissioner Ferguson, were you okay with either option as long as it's in third person?
No,
Option 2.
bullets and third person,
Okay.
areas of focus and assignments.
Okay, so I don't have a clear, well, actually I do. There seem to be 3 people in favor of option 2.
You can put me down for that too, Kat.
Okay.
I didn't really, didn't matter to me, but I think bullet does look better for personal
Okay.
focus.
is it okay to go with that, or do you all want to wait and think about it more?
I can go with that as well.
I can
Okay.
go with that.
Great. Thank you so much. This is easy.
Thank you, Catherine, for all the work.
No
you
one
do.
told me that we would ever have to, make such life and death decisions.
So I guess the next step will be reaching out to you guys and getting the list of items that you want and your biography. If you could, I'll just shoot an email.
Or we could draw each other's names and write each other's biographies.
That sounds good too.
just as a group building exercise. Thank you,
Thank
Catherine.
you.
I'll
Okay.
offer up Smarty's picture.
All right, moving on to item 4C, review of fiscal years 2023-2025 budget retreat agenda. It's that time of year again. And I'm guessing Jen is going to come into the room.
Good evening. I know you all have had a really busy night, but lots of good conversation. And I am joined for this item by Emily Bradford, our budget director, and she'll be leading us through walking through the draft agenda and getting your feedback.
Awesome. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Yeah, so hey everyone. So we have the budget retreat scheduled for Monday, March 21st. And you should have seen a draft agenda included in the agenda packet. And so just to sort of recap, we're planning on the retreat being virtual again this year. And given that it's virtual and it's going to be during the middle of the week, we are shooting to kind of keep the retreat around 2.5 hours if possible. And of course, though, realizing that if there are any topics or areas that we need additional discussion, that we can come back and continue those discussions at a future date. So right now we have April 4th as the date that's being reserved for a second retreat should that additional conversation or time be needed. But so looking at the agenda, we start off with a brief introduction followed by the community survey results. We are anticipating receiving those results prior to the retreat, and we're hoping to have them as part of the retreat as those results may impact or help inform any budget discussions that we have. So hoping to have those results in time for that. And then we'll follow that with item 3, which is the financial forecast or overview of our financial picture. And basically, we'll be looking at the bottom line, including fund balance projections and seeing what the impact is over the 3-year window that we're looking at, the 23 through 25 window. And included as part of that discussion will be any assumptions that have been made regarding property tax rates or water and sewer rates will be included as well. And then related, we'll move on to item 4, which is a discussion of budget request. And so kind of as we've done in years past, you'll receive a kind of like a one-pager with all of the notable budget requests and a brief description of what those individual requests are, and then whether or not they have or have not been included kind of in our bottom line numbers. And so again, as we've done in the past, we'll be seeking your feedback as to whether or not you agree with that or whether or not you'd like to see some changes made with regard to the various requests. And then we have a couple of discussion topics, one of them being an assistant, a request for an assistant finance director position. And the finance director is going to be making a request to add this position and wanted to include it as part of the retreat, just as since it does have ongoing financial implications, and wanted to have it as the discussion as part of our larger budget discussion so that we're making decisions in context of all the requests that are being made, as we'll be potentially looking to fill this position prior to July 1. So, so there's that. And then the second discussion topic is affordable housing. Margaret is going to be providing some information related to affordable housing, and there is, as you know, a request that has been made for funding related to affordable housing. And so we're looking to get feedback from the board on direction relating to the request. And so that is kind of the agenda as it stands right now, but wanted to open it up to all of you to see if you have any feedback related to the agenda as it currently stands. Commissioner Ferguson.
Actually, I think Matt was before me, so.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yeah, just one question. How do you imagine item 4, just the feedback on requests included, not included? Is that, do you plan to do that rapid fire? Because I'm not sure if 25 minutes is enough, knowing our knowing our group maybe, but maybe there's just not a lot of requests this year. So you know better than I.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten into exactly how that's going to work. I think in years past, sometimes we'll send out the information ahead of time and then ask you to kind of fill out, do you agree or not agree? And then you send it back, and then we kind of do like a kind of a quick digest of, if everyone's in agreement, we kind of move on. But if there's maybe some questions or additional information needed, or maybe there's some disagreement on, some are in favor, some are not in favor, we kind of talk about those specific requests in more detail. I imagine we'll do something similar. Does that work? Okay, thanks. All right, Commissioner Ferguson.
And I was just going to say, one, I like the agenda, and thank you for adding the affordable housing funding stream on there, because that's something I was going to add if we didn't have it. So thank you.
Ditto.
Looks good to me.
All right.
Yep, likewise. Thank you.
All right. So I'm hearing consensus on the agenda as it currently is. And then the other question we have is, are there any other topics that were not included that maybe should have been, or you'd like to see included?
I have one, and I don't know what the right timing is, but until we have it in action, I want to bring up the topic of participatory budgeting. I think we are at or close to where it may be doable, but I don't have insight the way you guys do, but I don't want it to drop off the radar. And when we can implement it, that we do as swiftly as possible. I think that is a real important component of
Kathleen, if I, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm done.
I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to jump in because I thought, so my understanding of from at our last meeting, when commissioners presented the list of things that you all wanted to talk about at future meetings, that was one of the things on your list. So I think my expectation is that at some point, Margaret is going to bring us back with some format where then the board can have a discussion about prioritizing those, so that we can, kind of figure out what everybody wants to where and when to put focus on when time allows.
I included there, but we are in budget season. This will be year 3 that I've brought it up, I'm going to continue doing that until we do. I wanted to add it on the list, but I also intended to bring it up here because it is budget season. So if we don't address in this season, it'll be a year, and maybe it's important for it to be a year, but that it's part of our deliberation and not because, for other, it's a decision that's made deliberately and not, as part of a pile that is not part of a calendared, scheduled process like budgeting is. And I don't know if I articulated that well enough. And like I said, when I began was, I don't know if this discussion or if this agenda, it's the right time or not. And I certainly defer to, folks on whether it is, but again, what I don't want to have happen is if we don't address it in this budget season, then by definition, the earliest we can do so really is the next budget in terms of implementation. I hope that made sense.
I don't have a hand to raise other than my own. I would like to hear from the town manager somewhere in here. Did you hear me?
On any item in particular?
The budget. I mean, overviews is like you normally do. You don't have to write, I mean, you can, whatever you want to say. I would like topics. I don't know what topics else you're going to have on here, but I don't, until I see the budget, I really don't have some idea, but somehow some of the things that I might like to hear about aren't on here, and I'll talk to you about it.
And, this is the early stage of the budget process, even more of the we won't start to have a flavor for what it's going to look like for another few weeks, but, you'll be hearing from me probably more than you want throughout the process. And whether it's, offline or during the meetings, I'm happy to talk to all the board members. And I'll be working with Jen and Emily on some of the items they're putting together for this as well. But I'm be happy to talk and interact and share thoughts during the retreat.
But there's some topics that I would prefer not to see again, but that's the way it is.
Indeed. So Kathleen, I'm sorry.
And it's no offense to them. It's just when you get tired of some topics, you get tired of topics, and you have to have something here. And I'll sit through it, whatever it is.
So Kathleen, I don't want to just pass over what your request is. And so these are just my thoughts thinking out loud, and I welcome thoughts from other people. But my instinct is that participatory budgeting is something that takes a good amount of planning and has to be done with great care to do it well, and that the board needs to have a good understanding of what the process is, what we'd be investing in. And so it's and again, I welcome input from other board members and staff, but it does seem like I appreciate the fact that you've been bringing this up for several years and it hasn't happened. And I think that one of the reasons is because we've had to, prioritize, what staff is doing with their time. So it doesn't seem like that's something that we're likely to be able to press in for this budget season. And that's why it kind of made sense to figure it out in the priority list. And maybe that's the time is to lobby when that list comes back from Margaret to see, what the board is interested in doing and prioritizing in that list. But I would really like to hear from others on that as well.
And to your point, I do recognize that, it's not something to take on lightly. I bring it up so that it does not drop off the scene.
Yep. appreciate you mentioning that again. And Emily and I are working on our response as part of that larger list that you all developed. So look forward to hearing more from the board as far as direction, and certainly can appreciate what Mayor Jen was saying in terms of the effort that goes behind it. So want to make sure to highlight some of the things that were part of that conversation when we came to the board last time, and hear your thoughts about how it fits within the priority list.
Thank you both.
Are there any other questions or comments related to the retreat agenda? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily and Jen. It's always nice to see y'all. All right, moving on to item number 5, other business. We have other business. All right. Moving to item 6, committee updates and reports. Evelyn, do you have any updates?
I have some, but it doesn't pertain to Hillsborough, actually.
All right. So is that a pass or do you want to report?
Well, I mean, it's a pass. I just really just it's arguments about this, about land that's not in Hillsborough, that and having a fire station somewhere else, and it's no point in going into it because I have no vote. You have no vote. And the manager can tell me if I'm wrong, but if it's outside the city limits, Hillsborough really has no say. Well, he may, but the board doesn't. Is that the way it is, manager?
If I understand correctly, I mean, Orange Rural Fire Department has been working on station relocation with the Phelps Road property and assessing where to put it. And like lots of times when you're trying to locate things, there's a lot of factors and impacts in surrounding areas, and Orange Rural's been spending a lot of time on that. But as Commissioner Lloyd said, that's a decision for the Orange Rural Fire Board, and I know they've been working hard on it. So.
Yeah, and then you've got two people. The fire department has a piece of land, and they want to divide it, and two other businesses want some of the land, and it's just back and forth. It's nothing to do with Hillsborough, really, when you get right down to it, what they talked about. So I don't see, I made it longer than, and I need to go home. I really do.
All right, well, let's get you home, Evelyn. Thank you. I'm sorry you're not feeling good. Matt, do you have any updates? All right. Kathleen?
Question is, do you guys all get the Triangle J after action report? Does everyone? Okay.
Yes, I got one that said it was fine. I answered you, Jen, I think. I think you sent something about Triangle J, Kathleen voting.
No, that was something different. I think Kathleen is asking if we get some kind of report.
It's a separate thing. There's a lot of information. I never know what you guys get, so I don't want to duplicate. For tonight, I'm just going to pass on that, but in the future, I will share more of that information because there's more relevant pieces.
I would appreciate it.
And just a reminder, 2 things. City Vision is coming up April in Wilmington with the League. Also, the Legislative Action Committee with the League is starting up. I am part of that committee and am taking suggestions, ideas to that on pieces of legislative focus or even a specific legislative topics that you want or you wish that the League would have as part of their top priorities. So please send them in. And Also with City Vision, as I mentioned, there's Women in Municipal Government, which is open to all staff and electeds across, and I will be giving a presentation on COGS to that organization's part of City Vision. We are also, we're just had a orientation, and we're doing more orientation on the partnership, and people that are interested in partnership, let me know. And as we get some of that, the new stuff, I'm glad to share. And I already shared a little bit about the opioid task force and a little bit of what those conversations are. And nothing new with Reentry Council.
Great. Thank you, Kathleen. Rob.
I had nothing to report.
Okay, Mark.
Two things. One, regarding the Orange County Transit Plan Steering Committee, another reminder that the deadline for feedback on the draft transportation plan is March 4th. And that the main takeaway for Hillsborough in this draft plan is that expansion of the mobility on demand service. And then for the Chapel Hill Orange County Visitors Bureau, I was elected chair of that board at the last meeting.
Yay.
And thank you. And that regarding kind of similar to Hillsborough's numbers, the occupancy tax is trending up very nicely, a little uneven in places, similar to our meals tax, Matt, and that conversation that's going on with your board there. That's it.
Thank you, Mark, and congratulations on being the new chair of the tourism board. That's great.
Thank you.
And I have nothing to report except to say that I'm meeting tomorrow morning with the other mayors and the chair and kind of the countywide group at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, hopefully including UNC hospitals, to hear to get an update on our trends, which have changed a lot in a favorable direction over the past week. But it'll be good to hear where things are officially tomorrow, and I will report back from there, because I know people are getting a lot of questions. And I think that covers everybody's committee updates. So now we can adjourn. Thanks for sticking in there. Evelyn, I hope you feel better. Happy birthday, Margaret. I hope your next birthday is more exciting than the one we gave you this year. We owe you. And have a great short evening, everyone.